Chair?
Oh, no, I'm fine.
Sure.
I'll sit on that ass shit if I need to.
Were you at the water board meeting today?
That was at hospital 3, I didn't know what was going on.
And it's all full. Thanks for being here.
I know.
No, not tonight.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, go ahead. I had it figured out earlier.
Oh, yes, sir. Only one right now. And I know she's business card, start talking about it. Right. But he do know time and energy.
Going in right here, excuse me. Are you gonna be speaking? Oh, you just here to watch or what? Okay. Do you mind if I stand right there so I can poke it in? And I'll move somebody, as soon as somebody leaves.
Yeah, well, this is me, I'm gonna still try to manage the job.
Somebody leaves out of
You can do that.
Wish we had a bigger complex, I know.
Yeah, there probably won't be no fish.
Me? No.
Richard, congratulations. Well, thank you. See that I'll push for you. Yeah. You know what kind of person I am? Well, I think it was,
Yes.
all right, good to see you.
Very nice lady.
No.
Day the 15th?
Maybe now.
Everybody's still gonna get to speak though, if they want to speak.
Who got to turn this?
I got you.
I put water, is that sufficient?
I'll
Or is
ask
it
you.
specific items?
Let me ask her real quick.
I'm running for commissioner.
The weather was cool.
Yeah, so the more I learn about it. So, try to. Yeah. 13 or 14.
She says, all right.
Yeah, you're good. I'm sorry, I got distracted.
No, that's cool.
Anybody else can be outside, I guess? Anybody else that can be outside?
Good man, how are you?
That's good.
Yeah, I was almost 20 minutes early. Did you go to the food lot?
You all right?
What's that? On the what? No. Billy talked to somebody, and he says that article
Do we grab one? You
in
take that one. I got it.
the Independent was pretty accurate, and that they're paying 260%. That's for the city, but we still have, and we're already 135%.
Exactly.
City.
Y'all, it's all
And they're 787. How you doing, man? James Bond Swiss on.
He's stuck in there.
If somebody leaves, the line is like back here, so when somebody leaves, then
Unless you're speaking,
I got them right here. They're the stack. I just grabbed the stack.
the only thing I know that's like a big deal is the
yeah.
Damn.
You want to sit down?
I'm the door man.
I'm sitting, it's super, you want to.
As soon as somebody leaves, then another person can go on.
Oh, okay.
He's all right?
Yeah. Billy was gonna drop it off. Yeah, it's signed and sealed as far as I know. It was supposed to be here last week. I'll check with him now about it. Thank you. Mhm.
Yeah, all those guys, they were rigging, that's why I guess they rigged on ground and, rigged on dead. That thing went into the eight.
This evening, we need you, we need the business of our city. The heat that we've been experiencing, we do pray for those who labor day after day, especially our first responders, who are the first ones on the scene. We do pray for your protecting hand to be upon all of them. Just let us take care of our business as it should be done. We need your involvement. We ask for your peace and your help today. For all that you do, we give you praise and glory. In Jesus' name, amen.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible.
Public comment, we've got a few this evening, I will call your name, and if you'll come up to the podium, we'll have 3 minutes on the floor. Start with Dave Jones.
May I ask the clerk, Okay. My name is Dave Jones. I live at 1582 North Lakeview Drive in Lake Palo Pinto. Let me refer you to the drought status and response report in front of you by HDR Engineering, dated September 9, 2014. Page 16, it says that raw water flows from Lake Palo Pinto approximately 27 miles through an open channel to the Brazos pump station, just below the Hilltop plant, where it's pumped into an 1,158-acre feed sedimentation reservoir for 30 days of storage. During that 30-day storage, the water is subjected even further evaporation prior to actually entering the plant. HDR states that evaporation losses from the open channel are 2 million gallons per day. Keep in mind that 2 million gallons per day does not include the additional losses that occur once the raw water is stored in the sedimentation reservoir in the 30-day period. Total estimated water losses prior to watering into the plant are likely much higher than what was stated in that 2014 report. Furthermore, there has been no meter at the output point of the lake, which translates to neither the city nor the district having the ability to provide an accurate measurement of the amount of water actually being diverted from the lake. This would also greatly affect the reported loss or waste making. The total likely must be higher in this report. The Water District Board appointed and or removed by the City Council includes the President serving his 10th successive 2-year term, and the Vice President currently serving the 6th successive 2-year term, have allowed more than 730 million gallons of water per year to be wasted, even prior to entering the Hilltop. To make that number seem more realistic, over 14.6 billion gallons of water have been completely wasted and unnecessarily wasted due to their tenure in these positions, even with their combined 31 years of management experience with water. Ladies and gentlemen, there's not only a water supply problem, but rather there's a profound level of mismanagement and a total lack of regard for our precious resources, and also the health and safety of water customers they are mandated to serve. We believe that there is a leadership problem that's been shoved under the rug for 20+ years. The solution provided with Turkey Peak is throwing $300 million of taxpayer funds at the problem instead of fixing the enormous and unnecessary waste that's currently occurring, that will continue to happen without a more efficient method of raw water transport. The amount of water that is lost after entering the plant are not even included in these figures. It's extremely wasteful as well. This is a prime example of mismanagement. Even with these enormous losses occurring, and with no provision provided in the future plans to halt this incredible waste of the people's water, we the people are being expected to invest $300 million of taxpayer monies for Turkey Peak as a new water source. And even worse, you've taken the voters out of the equation by funding the project with water rate increases rather than ad valorem property taxes. A project of this magnitude should be voted on by the voters plain and simple. Let's talk about the Water District's general manager stated publicly on August 3rd that the $200+ million Turkey Peak Reservoir is, quote, is the best bang for the taxpayers' dollars, unquote. The general manager went on to say that no alternatives were, quote, cheaper than the new lake, and listed cost analysis comparison with the alternatives. My first question is who performed the cost analysis? Where does the general manager get his numbers? I would like to see copies of those studies by qualified engineering or water consulting firms made available to the public. We want to see that these numbers have sources that are not just being thrown out to the public for somebody's opinion. For example, he stated the excavation of Lake Palapinto would necessitate removing 3.5 miles of the lake bed 10 feet deep at the cost of $400 million over a 3-year period. Please provide the data or the 3 bids from the firm submitted to arrive at this conclusion. He also referenced a 36-mile pipeline from PK Lake, and that costs us more than $225 million to include a reverse osmosis plant to desalt the Brazos River water. I want to see the verification of the $225 million option and exactly how it was arrived at. I will say, this option makes more sense to solve the short-term and long-term water problems. Currently, PK has 516,972 acre-feet of reservoir water storage compared to 10,659 acre-feet of Lake Palapinto. Excuse me. PK Lake is 50 times larger than Palapinto. Even though we're under a severe drought, PK is 96.1% full, and Lake Palapinto is only 38% full. The watershed there is more capable of supporting both our short and long-term needs, and more adequately as a new water source for our region. In closing, HD Engineering recommended a pipeline in 2014 in the very report that's in front of you from Lake Palapinto to the Hilltop facility. If the Water District would have listened and acted upon the professional advice of their own engineering firm, over 15 billion gallons of water would not have been wasted over the past 20 years. Furthermore, the water rates would not be going up by 70% and put on the backs of mineral wells to pay for such a wasteful and expensive project. There's simply not enough tax base in mineral wells to fund the project, nor should water be sold to fund the project, because once it's sold to other cities, it's almost impossible to stop selling the water after it's committed to you by the state of Texas. This is a huge gamble for the residents, with the board management at the Water District who have failed to manage the existing resources adequately. Judging from the failed management over the past 20 years, we have no guarantee that this project might end up in turning into a $500 million big dig project. It's time for new leadership of Water District 1. Finally, District 1's board should be elected positions from the entire service area, not just the city of Mineral Wells. This gives persons like me, who live outside Mineral Wells, in the district, a representation and voice in any of the matters that affects our future water resources and distribution. Thank you for your time.
Denise Aparicio.
Good evening. My name is Denise Aparicio. I'm a lifetime resident of Palapinto County, raised in Mineral Wells, both parents and grandparents as well. For decades, our town's management failed to prioritize its most basic needs. This is no new news. None of this is. While I watch other cities thrive, ours degrades. For 4 months, as multiple calls to the city, I watched water leak from my dad's meter into the street. The street he lives on completely torn up with a sign of Thomas's Place at the end. In 1 year, the sign taken down and the street is worse than it was when it started. Instead of creating a solid foundation, purchasing offices and relocating offices, proposed plans, abandoned projects, and a list of other things have drained our funds. The recent news on the plans to increase water bills is horrible. What happens when we cannot shop locally? because we're too busy paying taxes enforced by local and state entities. What happens to the businesses, and how does that not cause alarm? The cry of water prices goes out, has for years. This is a long-standing problem with no water security for our county and city. Local powers have allowed land developers to sell out land for new homes all over the county with no plans or responsibilities for paying for infrastructure, piping, or distributions for their new homes. The City of Mineral Wells Water Department made no effort of free restitution on sale of water to multiple customers to profit from these sales. Now we're in trouble again. It will take years before we take a drink of water out of Turkey Creek Reservoir. And what about the $3 million wasted on a $6 million desalinization project at the rises on Pelican Creek? Why not complete those now versus years? Anger and bullying on social media is enough to make your head spin. The list of armchair warriors longer than the lines to vote, but I hope to not just talk, but to act and encourage others to act. It is time to speak. I do not have the answers, but I can assure you, raising taxes on a mostly poverty-stricken community is certainly not the answer. Thank you.
Brandon Johnson.
Can I take her spot? I'm not here.
Water is a necessity. It's one of the primary functions of government. So that's really not in dispute. It's been mentioned that if you're losing half of the water between Palo Pinto and here, I mean, I don't even know how that's acceptable on anything. You know, when I got involved in this, I had to is 30 and there's not 30 there. You know, I tend to real business. But y'all want a $5-6 million city hall? This thing's on steroids, $284 million. I mean, I hope every one of you have the ability to step down from council and retire after this. Because that's enough fat for each of you to get at least $1 million. And if you're not, somebody is. Things have doubled in cost across all industries since COVID. You're asking almost triple. That's pretty astounding. But I think you should double it. I think you ought to double what you're asking for. You ought to go ahead and double it and include the infrastructure under the streets themselves, curbs and gutters. And I get it. You're going to say, oh, we can't do that. Why not? It's my understanding. I could be wrong. But you're including a new maintenance facility in this $284 billion or $1 million facility. Now, I would ask if you did that you would hire contractors that can complete the job in one go instead of redoing the same road or the mayor's road on the side and not actually doing anything else. Not being able to get it done without tearing it up and doing it 2 or 3 times or hiring 2 or 3 contractors. Until you double what you're asking, and the weight of the government's boot, whether it's here, down in Austin, or Washington, is so heavy, if the people can't bear the cost, it's not going to change. And so that's why I kind of focus my energy in other places. And I was asked to come down here and, video it. Glad Amy came down too. A lot of folks are interested in this. So I think the way to really amp up the interest is to double what you're asking for and just get it all done in one go. Thank you.
Lot 1, Pay A, Pay Storage Field, Mineral Wells, Pelican County, Texas. We open our public hearing at 6:16. Is there anyone present that wishes to speak on this item? No person wishes to speak. Close the public hearing at 6:17.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and Council. If you have any questions for me, this is just the final plat of the preliminary that we approved, that y'all approved last year.
No changes from the preliminary?
No changes. Yes, sir.
He got the, okay, airport people do what he wants to do, or is that what
My understanding is that they will not let him submit the plans until the platting is completed. Once the platting is completed, then he can send in a side plan, those approved and not, no changes. Based on that.
I'll make a motion to approve the,
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion passes 7-0.
Thank you.
Item number 8, consider and take appropriate action on the discussion of Hilltop Securities relating to financing and funding for the proposed water and wastewater capital improvement projects.
Good evening. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Maureen Shu with Hilltop Securities. We represent the City of Sherwood Financial Advisor. Also here with me this evening is Ruby Segura from the Paul President from Morton, who represents the City of Sherwood County. I feel like I have the easiest part of the presentation tonight because I get to go over just kind of bottom basics, and we're going to drill down into some more specifics regarding your issues. I did want to just briefly introduce myself for those of you who weren't familiar with Hilltop Securities. We are one of the largest financial advising firms in the country. We have kind of a U-shaped presence around the country. In Dallas, Texas, so that's where we brought it from. That's our house because that's where I office out of. We are a full-service investment bank, but public finance is our primary bread and butter. So municipal advisory services and underwriting is what we do. We are on average involved in anywhere from 18 to 20 transactions per week in the market, either advising issuers on the sale of bonds or actively putting our capital out there for the buying and selling of bonds. As I see, we are consistently ranked as one of the top municipal advisors in Texas. Stats are coming out of the number 1 or 2. We have, just to give you an idea, we have over 1,000 clients in the state of Texas. So as you can imagine, we have number, they range in all shapes and sizes from very small to large state agencies. We are also one of the number 1 ranked advisors when it comes to city. So as I mentioned, municipal bonds, that's not really what we do. We kind of wanted to talk about bonds. Everybody here, and you might not be as familiar with them. So just starting very basic, what is a bond? It is a debt obligation. It's an IOU, a form of a loan. Debt often gets a terrible or bad rap, but it is a very powerful leverage tool that can be used to better match the assets and liabilities across your planning. It's very similar to a home mortgage. We use this as an analogy a lot of us finance our large asset purchases, right? So when you go to buy a home, chances are you're applying for a mortgage. Same holds true for the city if you're financing large purchases. It's very similar. You kind of start off by what am I looking to finance? Okay, you want a home. How much can I afford? Well, how much you can afford depends on your credit rating, which translates to an interest rate and the financing of the loan. So it all kind of works hand in hand. The bond issuance process is very similar to that. We start off by looking at your needs, then we evaluate the different funding options. The city does have a credit rating that, as part of the normal bond issuance process, the city will have to apply for and purchase a bond rating. It functions much like you or I, our own personal credit rating. So the higher your personal credit score, the lower the cost of borrowing is when you go to apply for a mortgage or finance a car. Same holds true for the city. So the higher your credit rating, the lower the cost of borrowing when you go to actually sell bonds. And it's very similar to mortgage process, lots of documents. You have, once you decide you got your home, you're gonna coordinate your related service providers, who's gonna provide you that loan. You're gonna sign your life away in 1 million documents. The mayor's gonna sign their life away in the bond document as well. Same holds true for the bond. And then you have a closing and you receive the funds. So again, bonds are just a way to leverage to receive a larger amount of money up front and spread out that payment over a longer period of time so that a lot of your future constituents and users can bear the burden of the asset. So if you have an asset that you're financing that has a useful life of a longer period, it helps remove the pressure from the current rate payers and the current constituents. So everybody can pay their fair share over time of the asset. So a bond is a security transaction. There are usually a number of professionals involved. This is a busy slide. I'm not gonna go through all of these in depth. This is hopefully can be used as a handy reference tool for you. But because it's a securities transaction, there are a bunch of professionals involved, typically anywhere from 6 to 7 different different entities. But I'm gonna focus on the 2 on here that are represented, your financial advisor and your bond counsel. The role of a financial advisor is to hold a fiduciary to the city. And they more or less, the bond counsel and the financial advisor, tag team to help quarterback the transaction. So our goal is to be the liaison between you as the city issuer and the securities market. A fiduciary role is important because that means I am required to act in your best interest regardless of personal gain. I have licenses to uphold that standard. It's part of how I make a living. And it's very important because the financial advisor and the bond attorney are there to represent you. Bond attorney is very important because they're there to make sure nobody goes to jail, make sure everything is issued and conformed with state law purposes. They act as your liaison between the issuance and the Attorney General's office, and they render the tax exempt opinion on the bonds. So these 2 professionals together help coordinate all your other service providers and help it be as seamless as possible, taking you through the bond issuance process. The type of debt issuance is determined by the security pledge. So we lump all bonds into 2 umbrellas. We consider them general obligation as one umbrella and revenue as another umbrella. And the distinction between those 2 umbrellas is the underlying security pledge. So anything within the general obligation umbrella contains a security pledge of the ad valorem property taxes. Anything else that doesn't include a security pledge of the ad valorem taxes falls under the revenue pocket. And that can be water and sewer revenue, sales tax, anything else on that side that doesn't have the property tax pledge, water and sewer. Revenue. These are the 4 most common types of bonds issued. I could be up here talking about bonds all day long, but I want to be mindful of your time and I don't want to put everybody to sleep. So these are the 4 primary ones, the top 2 being what we would consider under the general obligation umbrella because they have the property, the ad valorem property tax pledge. General obligation bonds you may be familiar with are those that are required to be voted by the public. Certificates of obligation also contain an underlying security pledge of the ad valorem property taxes, but they do not require a vote. They do require some authorization before issuance, and the city is required to publish notice of its intent to issue those COs within 45 days of the sale. Both of those have the ad valorem property tax pledge. Revenue bonds and contract revenue bonds, again, do not require any voter authorization. They are issued for the revenue producing of the operating system. So the security pledge for whatever you're financing is generally what's associated with that. Because revenues are soon to be a little bit more cyclical, meaning there are elements beyond your control, they typically have slightly higher financing costs. So your ad valorem property tax is the full faith and taxing power of the city. It's your strongest security pledge. If you're gonna have an underlying revenue pledge, it's gonna require a few more covenants because again, let's think about water and sewer, very apropos, you can have a wet or dry year. There's an element of those collections that are not within your control. You get the rates and charges associated with that. But as such, bonds that are secured by underlying revenues require a few more covenants and typically sell at, or typically rated just below that of your ad valorem property tax pledge debt. So that is just very basic, super fast, high level. It's very basic, high level. And just to drill down into the issue specific of what we're talking about, what you're looking at, we put together an illustrative timetable of events. So typically it takes us anywhere from 60 to 90 days to bring a bond issue to market. And the bulk majority of that is goes into preparing the offering document that goes out to the public. Once an offering document is prepared, it includes all the financial metrics of the city as well as the audit. We then give it to the rating agencies and you go through the rating agency process, as I mentioned. They will provide a lot of questions to keep staff up so that they can do a full credit assessment on the city and release a rating in connection with the issuance. Once we have that, we can actually price bonds. They come to the city council for a final approval. Then they go to the attorney general. All bonds in the state of Texas are required to be approved by the attorney general. And then you can close and receive your bonds. Receive your funds within 30 days of the pricing. So you have a large number of infrastructure needs, which is why we're talking about bonds to begin with. Because again, back to, it is a very effective leverage tool to get access to large upfront money and spread the cost of that over a long period of time. So all of that brings us to our crescendo of what does a bond issue actually look like? And this is, we've illustrated for you an example of what it would look like if you funded $81 million. So we've got two scenarios in front of you. I understand as part of your capital improvement program, you've got $81 million, and then we're going to fold in the Turkey Peak scenario into the next one. But this is to give you an illustration of what that looks like. If you amortized it over a 30-year period, it would translate to about $5.2 million of annual debt service. We have assumed this at current market rates, and we've assumed that you would be issuing revenue bonds, which would have an underlying security pledge of the water and sewer revenues associated with the system. We try to be conservative. Currently, the city does not have a water and sewer rating, so this would be a brand new lien and a brand new process that would be rating you for the first time. It gives you a lot of flexibility to create the bonds and set up the terms according to what you need. So this is just, again, an illustration, and we've also stretched this out over a 30-year period for an amortization. 20 to 30 years is very common for amortizations, and it's important to note that when you issue bonds, the interest rate is fixed for the life of the issuance, so there's a lot of security that you don't have movement of payments over time. As you can imagine, when we're folding in Turkey Peak, $281 million, that increases your payments accordingly. When we fold that in, your payments go up to about $18.3 million. This is an illustration only. This is looking at it if you issued everything today. And I don't know if you mentioned this, but your current interest rates where the market is today, we would estimate your rate to be about a 4.66%, which is what we illustrated both of these at. In all likelihood, you would not be issuing these bonds all at once, right? You can only reasonably spend the money within a certain period of time and really access. So this, again, is just an illustration. The goal would be to actually layer in debt over time as you manage your rates and charges associated with that. One of the first questions that we get asked when we're looking at financing alternatives is what kind of grant money is available? Where can I get subsidies? And it's probably no shock to anybody in here if I tell you that free money is hard to come by. It's very difficult to access. It is very competitive to access. It usually comes with some strings attached to it, and there is a time cost associated with it because it can be time consuming to approach. Now, that is not to say it is not available and it's not worth pursuing, because it certainly is. But we always want to look at all these different alternative funding options and be mindful of how realistic it is to access those funds. So fortunately, in the state of Texas, we have several programs that we can access. As my role is your financial advisor, again, my goal is to help you determine the most efficient, cost-effective form of financing. We have to look at all these different programs, and my goal is to provide you with the pro-cons associated with them. So in the state of Texas, we have the Texas Water Development Board, which is a state issuance program that you can actually participate in. They have all sorts of funding programs. We're going to start with this one first. But one thing that is important to note, that their best funding programs that offer the lowest subsidy in terms of their interest rate program is not available for Turkey Peak. It is just the state revolving funds do not have a reservoir project listed and available for access of those funds. So automatically, those are off the table. And when we start to drill down and we look at all the other programs, we try to, again, come up with a pro-con and look at the differences in terms of where your financing is and the costs associated with that. I will note there's another program, the Core Water Infrastructure Financing Program, the second one we've got up there. This is a relatively new program, the USACE. It is a brand new program that they just released funding availability in July of August, so I will temper with, I think they're probably gonna have to work out a few kinks. I think one of the key aspects to which we have to advise on is that anytime you're dealing with a state or a federal agency, as you can imagine, there is a time expectation or extra time. It takes a little bit longer to go through those processes. In addition, there's also political risk associated with them because most of these funds are appropriated at a legislative or federal level. And so moving forward, there's not always a guarantee to the accessibility of funds. So it's just something to be mindful. These are wonderful programs. We advocate using them to the extent that they're available, but again, just managing expectations. The reality is that sometimes the cost associated with them can outweigh the subsidies required. So just to give you an idea, and again, that brings us down to the last bullet point on here, where time is money. I've kind of ranked if we were looking at these programs by term, ranked from lowest cost to highest cost, I would say your Texas Water Development Board SWIFT program is probably comparable to your open market right now. There is a subsidy on interest rates, but because of the time delay, which we've estimated, just to give you an example, your engineering value of delay is approximately $200,000 per month added to your project cost. That's about $2.4 million in additional project costs for every year of delay. The Water Board will take a minimum of a year of funding, and then the USACE program will take anywhere from 1 to 1.5 years. And that's based on what we know right now because that is a new program. In addition to project delays and engineering costs, there are additional administrative requirements to participate in these programs. That can be costly as well. And then you also have market rate risk. And that's just, you have that no matter what, and that is interest rate risk as we look at it. Just to give you an idea, on $81 million, the movement or the value of 1 basis point, which is 0.01% of interest rate, translates to $190,000 roughly. So a 0.126% movement in interest rates is equivalent to a year of delayed construction or additional project costs. Interest rate movement can significantly change the cost of the project. And I love this slide because it just gives you an illustration of what we have seen with interest rates. The market, as you know, is impacted by all of the socioeconomic situation that's going on. So this kind of illustrates in the last 2 years, I think everybody here, if you've been following headlines, you're probably familiar, we are in what we would consider a rising interest rate market. Prior to 2021, we were at a 64-year all-time low as far as interest rate, and sadly, we are no longer there. We have seen a very large increase. There's a lot of speculation about where rates are going. Unfortunately, my crystal ball is murky. I would be on a beach in Bora Bora if I knew where they were going, but I don't. What we know is rates today. And we've illustrated the MMD curve. To note, this is what most tax-exempt bonds are priced off of. I think significantly kind of included this slide as well because a lot of people reference treasuries. There are a lot of different rate or indices curves that are used to judge or used for benchmarks for market conditions over time. MMD is what taxable municipal bonds are priced off of. I'm sorry, tax-exempt municipal bonds are priced off of, and U.S. Treasuries are what taxable municipal bonds are priced off of. And this is just to kind of show a relationship between the two, and this is significant because in your USACE or your federal program, those bonds are priced off of Treasury, which would be equivalent to a taxable rate, which is why those are a little bit more costly even though it's a federal program. So all of those underlying metrics have to be taken into consideration. The time associated with your financing needs to be taken into consideration. And again, we can help evaluate all of these different options for you, and they do change over time with market conditions and availability. This was very high level, a lot of information. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. I think the presentation after mine is going to drill down into the rate study and the actual projects itself. But again, the goal of this was just to illustrate the various financing options and help address any questions that you might have on those.
One question, when you calculate the annual interest payment, you calculate that as if all of those funds were drawn on that first day? Or do you put into those calculations a step plan?
Yes, so when you issue bonds, you issue for an amount that you start paying on interest immediately. You do not typically go for a commitment and then draw funds at a later date. You get the best bang for your buck if you're issuing in the long-term market, mainly because if you went to a lender and tried to get secured financing for the large bulk of your projects, let's say it's the $280 million just for illustration purposes, there would be a cost to that commitment, but you might not need that $280 million all at once. So it wouldn't make sense to issue for that, and it wouldn't make sense to pay the cost of securing somebody to hold that money available for you under draw. So typically you will issue bonds only when you need the funds for the amount you need. And so your financing terms will change with market conditions over time as you decide to actually issue those bonds. And the city council has to approve the bond issuance every time you go to the market. And one thing I didn't mention but is important to note, that even if you're utilizing alternative financing programs like the Water Board or federal program, you're still issuing bonds. It's always a bond issue. That is the legal entity that you have to securitize and pledge those revenue streams associated through it. So even if you're going through the Water Development Board, you're issuing a bond, they just act as the sole purchaser versus an open market transaction where you have multiple investors who can be purchasing your bonds that's put out to the public. So you would do that on an individual basis.
You mentioned a couple of opportunities of potential low-interest loans from Texas Water Development Board and this new one. And you also, I think you covered really well the additional cost of delay. Can and I know you mentioned what we are considering as a market rate bond issuance. Can you tell me, in your opinion, how much interest rate difference there would need to be whereby the time consideration maybe equals itself out? Because the market is so volatile at the moment,
Right, well.
does my question make sense?
It does, and I mean, I think where we kind of try to look at it, I'm going back to this slide, where I think it's really what you're asking for is kind of what we've illustrated with 190,000 on the .01. So we can look at the break-even analysis, and say, if you're getting a benefit right now, and I will say this, the district is utilizing the SWIFT program. So thankfully, you are getting subsidized rates. So the $12 million that is being funded through the district is coming at SWIFT. So we know right now where their rate estimates are and where the differential is between our estimates on what we have. Now, I've been very conservative, but we can say that's about 70 basis points in theory. So we can translate to that, to a break even. So it would be like 200,000 times 70. I don't have my calculator. I'm not that great with math off the top of my head. But we can calculate the break-even analysis, and that's exactly what we look at to help try to illustrate the costs associated with that. And then again, I would lead you to this, which is helpful to show you kind of over time how quickly the interest rates can change and what that can translate to significantly. The interest rate, I think, differential over time, generally speaking, can translate to a lot more costs than even just a project delays adding to the large home for.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, Marty. Could you address, I think in some of the smaller bullet points, there may have been some reference to some additional costs with requirements to access federal money. Davis-Bacon wages. Can you talk about what kind of costs would be required beyond delays, just like adding to the top line?
Sure. I can't give you specifics, dollars, but I can tell you, generally speaking, there are additional engineering requirements, which translates to additional engineering costs. So to comply with, when you're dealing with any state or federal agency, there are just additional requirements. They have rules and administrative processes that you have to comply with. And as such, it translates down to every stage, from engineering to administrative aspect of just handling paperwork associated with it. So, and some of that can be minimal. It's difficult to calculate a cost associated with that, and we certainly know we can determine on the engineering side what those translate to. For example, you could have an additional environmental study that would be required that you wouldn't have with a traditional open market transaction. So those are little, those are those additional costs that we have to take into consideration to comply with all of those regulations. So, yeah, I think I put those in there. Yeah, the additional engineering. So I think we've got your estimated additional engineering costs just on the project delay being 200,000. That does not include the additional administrative costs associated with the project. I just wanted to clarify that.
My question is, you compare the issuing of bonds to a mortgage.
Mm-hmm.
So what's the difference today's rate between 20, 30, 40 years on today's rate?
Well, so the longer you amortize bonds, you're gonna have a higher rate. The shorter, I would say, I don't know how that compares to the mortgage market, but I can tell you in the bond market, I've been giving a lot of my clients the rate ranges. So on a 20-year bond right now, I would say at a AA level, which is where the state would be, keep in mind the underlying credit rating is, determines a lot about where you're gonna get your interest rates. I would say we're seeing bonds priced on 20 years from 380 to and 4%. So 3.8 to 4% on a 20-year transaction. On a 30-year transaction, I would say we're seeing anywhere from 430 to 450. We've been conservative for these numbers and estimating a 466 under a revenue transaction. As a financial advisor, I'd rather err on the side of caution and be conservative and present you things, and I'd rather, what's the saying, not under-deliver, over-promise. I don't want to give you false expectations for lower
What about
payments.
40 years? Is that common?
It can be common, well, I would say it's not common, but you can issue. We traditionally do not see issues go beyond 30 years. The general rule of thumb is you want to match the useful life of the asset that you're financing with the term of the transaction. So I would say 20 is probably the most common. 30 is what we use to help minimize the impact or the payments over time. You can go out to, I'm tracing into Rudy's, yeah, you can go out to the maximum of 50 years by law, but that is not as common. We do not see that.
It's my understanding this project is a 50-year plan, correct?
The capital improvements are on 30-year term, and the lake itself is on a 40-year term under the proposed rates and discussions we've had with our financial advisor and our bond counsel.
And so,
Is that collateral, all these capital improvements, this plan is based on 50-year growth today?
Right, so much like Lake Palo Pinto and the current water treatment plan at the outset, those were life cycles at 50 years for both of them. So, and I don't know, it's more of a Corey question, he can pick it up in a minute on the Turkey Peak update, but typically your capital assets in a municipal government environment of this type will probably have a 50-year life cycle or use cycle, which is, again, to Marty's point about why generally the term for the 30-year and 20-year notes is fairly common, because you've got your note paid for and then you've got years of usefulness without having to go back into debt.
and anytime you're extending out your amortization, you are paying more in interest over the life of the transaction. So there does become a break even, so to speak, where the interest rate gets so high going out farther that you lose the minimal impact of the payments.
I understand,
So the goal is,
Yeah, I understand that 100%. It's just this project's so big that it's almost, I want to just visualize it as a rental, right? We're making this payment, technically we're never gonna, by the time we get paid off, we're gonna need 50 years from today. So, that's kind of, I was just trying to figure out a way to lower payment.
On that note, looking at interest rates, knowing, right now they're high, like with other types of financing, is there the opportunity to refinance that bond at any point?
yes. So that's an excellent question. Thank you for bringing that up. Typically, bonds are sold with a 10-year prepayment option, or it's a call date as we call it. A traditional yield curve looks like this, where rates on the back end are higher than the front end. We're actually in an inverted yield curve right now, so it's a little bit of an anomaly. But as you move down the yield curve, there do become, and time goes on, you do get availability to refinance. If all else holds true, and the relationship of interest rates holds true, you should have an availability to refinance those at a later period for savings purposes. The closer you get to the call date, the more economic that becomes. You have the ability to prepay the debt at any time, but there's a cost analysis that doesn't quite make sense the farther away from that call date that you are. But it's important to note, if you can also shorten the prepayment option on the call date and take it shorter, but there's a cost associated with that. If an investor is giving you the ability to prepay your bonds early or refinance them early, they're gonna charge you a higher interest rate up front, and that's why effectively we will save costs a little bit more. But we can evaluate those for you. They're based on a market conditions as you get close to sale as well.
So in essence, you're saying there's a penalty to pay off early?
There's not. It's not how we would effectively think of it, like a prepayment penalty. It's just you don't get the savings associated. You don't get the benefit of maximum savings until you get close to the prepayment date. So you can prepay it off at any time with no penalty to you, but you will have to put the money in escrow to make the payments on the bonds until that prepayment date. Upon which, when the prepayment date occurs, the bonds are extinguished, they're gone. When you prepay debt, either you do it with cash, you have to put more up front in an escrow to the extent that it can't earn enough to make those payments. So you really don't get the best bang for your buck until you get close to the call date. But you can always prepay them at any time.
Thank you.
So if we were to receive some help, 24 months into the project, right, from whether it's the federal government or state, would that be considered pay down or pay off, or how would that work with bonds?
If you got some form of grant money, is that
Well,
what you're saying?
for
essentially?
example, if you issue a bond for a specific project, and that's the project that qualifies for the help.
Oh,
Therefore, you cannot mix the funds, correct? What would you do at the time?
Well, you can prepay the debt, you can pay it down. You can also reallocate it.
I would say, College Park Care is important. I would say, generally speaking, when getting some kind of grant money is not realistic, for a lot of reasons. Primarily, I'd say the majority of it is based on the median household income of the city's base and the customer base. And generally, for federal, clean water, state, all the programs, it all relies on having a household income of, I think, about less than $39,000. So, and it's prioritized to the communities that are way below that. So, but if you did, usually when there is help, like for instance right now with the CARES Act funding, they usually don't allow it to be used on projects that were already underway to begin with. So that, yeah, I think generally if you did get, it would have to be for something else to help. You know, maybe something, there's a big list of projects there, we're only funding a chunk of them, so maybe you could use it for some other element, lift stations, water treatment plant. But generally speaking, if you already financed it, there's a lot of rules against double dipping. You can get other funds to finance what you've already financed.
Well, my question was related to the collateral. You know, and I know it's hard to call it collateral, but can that collateral be exchanged for the existing bonds that be issued already if a program become available for some of the projects that have not started?
Yeah, so just to clarify, yeah, there's unlike a mortgage on a house, you actually pledge the land and the building, right? Here, there's none of that. There's
So
no
collateral is
the city's ability to sell water.
Okay.
Yeah, revenue, exactly. That's the collateral. So you can refinance and you can reallocate usually within 18 months. So if I borrow money on September 1st for $10 million and I allocate that to Turkey Peak, I have up to 18 months to say, never mind, I'm going to allocate that $10 million that we spent on Turkey Peak to our general fund or utility fund and reallocate those dollars to another bond project. So that is possible, but it's a very short window.
Okay.
Yeah, I was just gonna add that the way I was thinking about it is essentially you would reduce your future bond issuance, right? So if you had funds that became available, you would utilize that to reduce the amount of your next issuance and to allocate it accordingly that way.
That was gonna be my question. So if funds did become available, let's say the ticket's $200 million, we could decrease actually the overall total bond issuance. Say if we got 24 million, we could, or 25 million, like I said, we could drop it to 175.
Right, because you're not likely gonna issue that $200 million.
All at one
I mean,
time.
if you got a windfall of cash wherever it came from, you could get, something in your coffers tomorrow. You could use that to reduce the issuance moving forward. So your first issuance might be 20 million out of that 200 million project. You've got all those available funds that you could allocate those monies to.
So it's 20 million, a typical kind of first pool, and another 20 million, or you just using that for reference?
I just use that for
Okay.
reference.
So to this point, as has been emphasized to the council in this discussion, we're gonna continue to actively pursue assistance and work with our financial advisors and bond counsel right up until the point in the timeline when construction is necessary. So, like the analogy about a home mortgage, and if you built a mortgage on a home, how you have those draws. We're not gonna draw money that we don't need just because y'all may have authorized it. And we're gonna continue, for example, on the effluent recovery project, we know for a fact that there is federal assistance, that's a new program, as well as state assistance that may be available based on our situation and circumstance. So in that regard, we will pursue that up until the point in the timeline when it becomes necessary to come before the council, draft the ordinance for your consideration and possible approval to issue that amount necessary, and that will apply to all of these projects, save and except or compete, because it is already underway. And should we decide to pursue and start over, it could very well and will most likely reset the clock back to perhaps as much as 10 years. And the question is, can you afford another 10-year delay to secure water necessary for, here we are now, but even the future. So that was the point I was trying to make as we talked about this over the past several meetings, is we're not gonna just, oh, great, they gave us some money, we're gonna roll over, we're gonna get it all tomorrow. We're gonna continue to pursue this assistance funding to the extent possible, but we have to get some shovels in the ground if that's your direction.
My last question is, if interest rates were to continue to trend, going up, okay, and we can project a huge increase through your crystal ball in the next 12 months, is it legal to issue additional bonds while an interest rate is affordable, since the collateral is based on
Your revenue.
the revenue, to secure the funds before you gamble and get a 12-14%, 3 years from today?
Right, so, this is kind of reduced territory, but I'll speak the non-lawyer language, that the IRS views tax exemption as a subsidy or benefit to you. They're not crazy about it. So in order to issue tax exempt funds and receive those lower interest rates because it's lost income to them, you have a bunch of rules you have to comply with. And one of which is that you have to have a reasonable expectation to spend the bonds or spend the money that you're issuing for within a 3-year time period. So you can't get too crazy and try to game the market in any sense and gaming is the wrong term. I think you're just trying to take advantage of low cost financing.
But based on our timeline, it's a 5-year timeline, so 3 years is not reasonable.
Right. Did I miss anything on that?
No, I think that's the IRS, there's people borrow on a tax exempt basis, which you clearly want to do for a project of this size and get a lot lower interest rate. The general kind of golden rules and commandments is you can't borrow more money than you need to. You can't borrow sooner than you need to. And then 90% of the money has to inure to the benefit of state and local governmental entities. So the general rule is you can only borrow as much as you can finance over a 3-year period. So, and that, makes sense because you're also, while it's sitting there, you're paying interest on it, right, while it's unused. And so there's also rules on, because you're also earning interest on it, there's rules on how much of that you can keep. A lot of times you have to pay it back to the IRS, but.
It's not the plan, I just don't know.
Yeah.
Thank you, Marty. Very,
Thank you.
very beneficial, very helpful information.
Thank you for allowing
between the districts, with Howard Huffman here presiding as the manager of the County Municipal Water District number 1. So, Turkey Peak project status update, that's a picture from the last drought. I always like to remind people while we're in the room talking about it. As you know, when reservoirs are full, nobody wants to talk about new supply development. Today, I want to give you just a high-level overview of what's been going on with the project, what are the various items that we're working on currently. I'm going to talk about schedule and what we know today and how our path forward is defined. And then a little bit about the capital improvement plan and what the district's looking at versus how all the information that Marty just talked about, what y'all are considering, how that could change the picture for the project going forward. So like I said, it's a good time to remind people we are in drought. This is a picture, a slide from the weekly drought update that we do with Dean and Howard, showing a comparison of the lake level today versus where the lake was at in 2013. And you can see that we're lower than we were in 2013. You can see those dashed lines on it. That's our best engineering estimate looking forward of what the lake level is going to be a month, 2 months, 3 months out. 25th percentile means it's not as bad as it could be. 10th percentile means it's really hot and dry, which is closer to what we're tracking right now. You can see that line on there, that stage 3, 857 level in Lake Palo Pinto. That's the trigger where a lot of things start to happen in the drought contingency plan. So Turkey Peak. Turkey Peak is an expansion of Lake Palo Pinto. We moved downstream 4.1 miles. We built a new dam at the same conservation level, and we nearly doubled capacity in the water supply reservoir. Some of the recent milestones, we've completed the 100% dam design. That was a really big milestone for us. And then as Marty mentioned, we secured SWIFT funding to continue the pre-construction activities. We've gone through that process with the Water Development Board, so much about what she said about the funding cycle, the extra engineering analysis, potential roadblocks. We'll get into that a little bit. But through the funds that we secured from the Water Development Board back in 2015, we've still been pushing forward on a lot of fronts. One being design, but the big effort since design's wrapped up is definitely land acquisition around the reservoir, and I'll dig into that a little bit more. Part of our 404 permit from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is a mitigation plan. We have to mitigate for the impacts to the waters of the U.S. that our project is going to cause. So we're moving forward to do our permittee responsible mitigation efforts. A lot of coordination with the county, with TxDOT, with the Water Development Board, some of our larger utility relocations, Texas and Mexico Power. All those things have been ongoing. Through that, we have the 2 roadway portions of the project. When we build Turkey Peak, we're going to inundate a portion of FM4. So we've been looking at improvements to Ward Mountain Road there to handle traffic until TxDOT does their ultimate FM4 solution. And then also a new bridge over the existing Lake Palo Pinto Dam to connect North Lakeview to South Lakeview and to do away with that dangerous water crossing there. The upcoming activities that we're kicking off now, we'll be able to do even more so once we receive the next round of funding from the Water Development Board, are the utility relocations. Those were going real well. We've got a good database of all those. We need to bring that back to the front. A couple of the special conditions in our permit require environmental sampling in Palo Pinto Creek, both before construction and after construction. So we'll be able to do those along our timeline. And one of the things that came out of the design effort is what we're calling contractor outreach. A lot of people think a dam is pretty simple. It's just a big pile of dirt blocking water, right? There's a lot more to it than that. You don't just want any contractor out there doing that construction for you. So we want to educate the contractor community on what our project is, what we think some of the challenges are, because they've got valuable insight from their projects all across the country and in some places even the globe, where they can bring in some lessons learned. So we would like an opportunity to dialogue with them and be able to incorporate some of their ideas when we go to bid, which is when we say, here it is, here's what we would like to construct, and then they would competitively bid on that. Cultural resources is something that we've done all along, but there's a big effort remaining in there. that we need those new funds to be able to complete, so that's something that we've got tagged out there. Continued stakeholder coordination, the bidding and preparation to go to construction. That's that contractor outreach, that's going through and making sure the three packages are put together. We've made assumptions all along through preliminary engineering and final design on how that construction package will come out. We need to revisit those, we need to make sure things are right. We did our TCEQ state dam review in 2021 on the final design. We have to go back before we go to bid and make sure nothing has changed in those regs, and we're still good there. So just a lot of things that, as we get closer to, we'll definitely be addressing and revisiting. I mentioned land acquisition. This is really a big milestone for us as well. 93% of the area of what we refer to as the district's acquisition line has been acquired. It's in district possession right now. 70% of the parcels, you can see on the map there, the green area is in the district's column. There's a few areas in a tan color there that are still remaining. Everything is on track, everything is in progress, offers letters are out in the mail. The district's land firm and land attorney are on top of all those issues, but we're just about there with the reservoir. There's a few other things that go into that. There's a Texas, New Mexico power line relocation we have to do, so we have to basically obtain that easement for them to relocate their line into. There's a little bit of right of way along Ward Mountain Road that we'll need to pick up. We need TxDOT to deliver over to the district and or county the existing easements for FM4 that we're going to inundate. So that's a legal transaction that has to take place there. And then the downstream conservation easements, which are part of our mitigation properties. I didn't have a map to show some of that, but the district has acquired roughly 50% of the mitigation area already needed through an area over by the new Palo Pinto Mountain State Park and other areas around the reservoir project itself. The downstream piece is the last piece of the mitigation effort that we're needing to acquire. So schedule on the path to construction. Since about 2021, we've been on this 2025 target date to go to construction. That really hasn't changed for us. As I mentioned, the pre-construction funds, this round of SWIFT funding that we're about to get, that's really going to allow us to make sure we meet that 2025 deadline. We need those funds to finish out land acquisition, start our utility relocations, do some archaeology and other things that need to be done to make sure that when we go to construction, all those pieces are squared away. We are anticipating about a 3-year construction time frame. That's a reasonable industry estimate. I think some of that contractor outreach could inform us a little bit about that. I've heard from some contractors that think they can do it sooner. Others think 3 years is about right, so I'm really interested to see what kind of value they can bring us there. I put a detailed update there, so as we get closer and closer to that bidding date, we get to answer more questions and refine our data to update that schedule one more time. We get to revisit all of our cost estimates with the latest inflation numbers, the market adjustments, everything else that's going on in the industry right now. We get to come back and refine that as we get closer to it. And my last sentence there is going to kind of lead into the next effort, but a lot of the efforts that we're doing right now are very sequenced. We're going to take care of this, and then we'll move on to this, and then we'll move on to that, right? And the reason we're doing that is cash flow. The district has these 2015 bonds that we're working against, and when those are gone, there's no funding for Turkey Peak until this next $12 million comes into play. So if we try to do everything at one time, we may not have enough money for land acquisition, for example. So we've been very diligent and very cautious to make sure that we are just in time with our effort and our progress and everything getting us to that point. Howard's done a great job. We are right on track. When those funds come in, they just pick right up and keep on going without any delay in our effort. So with that, I've got a couple of slides here. What I call CIP planning, so that's capital improvement plan planning. And this is the district's perspective, right? So the district has the Turkey Peak project, which we just talked about. You have the raw water pipeline that delivers water from the Brazos pump station up to the Hilltop Reservoir. You have the Brazos Pump Station located on Palo Pinto Creek. And those are the existing like raw water component, delivery components for the project, for the district. So I put on there the upgrade and slash reuse at current wastewater treatment plant. That's a bit of a new supply, right? It's a supply that we don't have, so that falls under the district's purview. So we've got that programmed in there, and then the new water treatment plant. As y'all know, the district is the owner of the plant, the city is the operator of the plant. So right now we have that in the district's column, and the question is, if the district were to go do all these improvements, what would the timeline be? So you can see all these gaps in there. Those are those funding cycles we talked about, the additional engineering you may have to do to look for that funding source. So if we take the Brazos Pump Station, for example, HDR is under contract with the district to do a feasibility study to figure out what do we want this pump station to look like, what could it be, those kind of things. Once we answer those questions, then it's like, okay, then we need to go to design. Well, right now, we may have to wait to either the next SRF cycle, say revolving fund cycle, to be able to go apply for those funds, take advantage of those subsidies, go through the 1.5-year funding cycle, and then we can start that process, right? So there's a delay there. And as you'll see as you go through there, the way we have it programmed, there's a design effort or a construction effort that's anticipated to need to be acquired pretty much every year through the next 96 months, give or take, right? So that's going back to the Water Development Board as the most logical funding source for quite a while. So Turkey Peak is the only one that's real continuous, and that's because I'm not showing you all the history that's got us to this point, where we ramped up and we slowed down, and then we had a drought, and then we stopped, right? So there's a lot of that history that looks very much like these other bonds, right? So compare that, contrast that with what the city is offering up in your water bond package, right? So as Marty said, we're not gonna necessarily do all these all at one time, but we take all those gaps out of the mix. And we go from a 96-month to a 66-month if you did want to do them all at one time, right? And then there's a cash flow analysis that goes behind this. But the comparison is that there's that cost of savings of money, cost savings of time, the interest rate variability from doing something like this versus continuing on the path we've been on and waiting for the right funding cycles to come up. So ultimately, even if the district secures Water Development Board funding, you guys as a customer of the district, will pay for that, but it's just the process and the time to get us to that point. I did one more of this, just showing it with years instead of number of months out there, just to kind of give you the perspective. It takes a while to design a new water treatment plant. The state is going to require you to evaluate whatever technology you want to evaluate in a pilot study. 6 months, probably a year at minimum, to make sure that it produces the results that the vendors say it will, so that you get the right parameters to move into design. So that's baked into that number. That's why that takes a long time there to do that. I think that's a good point to pause and see if y'all have any questions on the Turkey Peak project, or kind of how we're looking at the path forward.
I'm a little bit alarmed by the timeline on the water treatment plant, because that's really that goes down where dead in the water none of this even matters. So, I understand there's the permitting, there's the working with the state, there's all the stuff that, Turkey Peak looks very streamlined right now because of the background work that's going on, but in your experience, do you know of any, obviously, we can't look at adding additional costs, but any expedite options on the table that could get this water treatment plant done before 2030?
It's a good question. In terms of accelerating the water treatment plant, this assumes we start, at square one, right? Do we locate it at Hilltop? Do we locate it at an alternative facility, right? Going all the way through that engineering, all the way through that pilot study. There's a lot of good things about the Hilltop water treatment plant. I know we don't talk about that very often, but there are some things that work pretty well, right? The process is proven, it's been really good. And there are some ways to extend the life of that. So it becomes a question, do we spend a fraction of that money now, to keep things going another 10 years until we can't do that, or do we go all in? So I don't think that decision has been made yet, all in, or do we keep limping it along? But that's, for the purposes of this presentation, we said, let's go all in and let's see what it looks like.
It is my understanding that some of the other projects is going to allow us to rate our current plan in a different, well, it will be re-rate per se, which will give us more water, right, daily. Our, each improvement will benefit the current Hilltop plan. Is that correct?
Great question, yes. So the question is, aren't there certain components that limit our ability to produce water out of Hilltop, right? And TCEQ views your system from the Brazos pump station up through the treatment plant. And right now, the Brazos pump station is that limiting factor. So on the district CIP, that's why that Brazos pump station is running right up against Turkey Peak, because we know that's the bottleneck, right? So we want to address that to open up some capacity in the system. So this also goes to what Dean was talking about earlier, is all these things have a useful life, right? The Brazos pump station, the pipeline up to Hilltop Reservoir, Hilltop itself, all those things are pretty much past their useful life. Doesn't mean they're still not doing their job, but from an engineering perspective or risk perspective, there's risk in not doing something about that, right? The useful life for Turkey Peak is easy 50 years, right? My dam designers will tell you that's a 100-year project. You won't see it presented that way. You're not going to finance it for 100 years. But Lake Palo Pinto Dam, you know, with the right maintenance and care, it'll last a while. Turkey Peak will do the same thing. A pipeline's a little bit different. Most pipeline design lives are 20 to 30 years. Most of the pipeline bringing water from the Brazos pump station up to Hilltop is pushing 60 plus years old now. So it's definitely past its useful life. It carries a lot of risk with it. So that's why we station it that way. If we can take care of the pump station and then make sure that the pipeline is able to handle additional flow from the pump station, all that is going to help you out at Hilltop. And sure, we may have to do some minor improvements at Hilltop to get that rating even higher, but just fixing the Brazos pump station is going to open up a significant amount of capacity.
Which will give us time in essence.
Right.
But is overworking Hilltop a big concern? Is overworking Hilltop a big concern? I mean, right now it's like, what, 8 million a day? If you really tried to push 12 million, is that gonna cause some of the wheels to fall off the axle?
That's a good question, and I think some of those things need to be determined. Carlos, I believe you mentioned a re-rate or something a while ago. You know, there's some things we can do from an engineering perspective to ramp that up. We're not gonna fix Brazos pump station and then turn on Hilltop at, 12, 16 MT the next day, right? So there are gonna be bottlenecks, let me rephrase that. There are gonna be bottlenecks in Hilltop after we fix the Brazos pump station, right? Maybe it's 12, maybe it's 11. We've got to figure those constraints down.
Councilman, just for a little history you may not know about, we have a report from HDR kind of pre-COVID, giving us some guidelines, and we use that report every day to determine what projects at Hilltop are worth spending money on today, and which projects we need to just let go of and wait for the new plan. So we have some preliminary guidance that we could use every day between myself and staff at the city, and if moving forward, we would have to get more detail on other things that we would need to fix. But that process has started. It is in use every day to help us manage that facility.
Thank you.
Yeah, on the critique of Hilltop, there's been deferred maintenance, there's been delay, there is some deterioration, and some of it's even captioned as neglect. But when you put it in perspective that water treatment plant was put in service right around 1962 to 64, and it had a 50-year service life. So in 2014, and you think about an old car, and so you take care of a car, it might last a long time, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it was just some ambivalence from prior administrations or staff out there. I mean, the thing was old, and some things last longer and some don't. But as far as HDR, we had them come in, if you'll recall, to verify the TCQ violation on their capacity assessment, and it was confirmed that right now, due to the limiting factor at the Brazos pump station, that is an 8 million gallon per day plant. And we had adjusted our consumption and our wholesale allotments accordingly. That said, we know that if the pump station and the pipeline that has been incremental up to this point, as funds were available or the rates would vary, we can limp it back to something in the neighborhood of the 11 to 12 million gallon per day capacity that the city thought it had in the allocation of water resources. We gotta have water though before we can do anything. But that delay on the district's timeline, when you really put it in perspective, you don't get any resolution on our circumstance with regard to the pipeline, pump station, or the water treatment plant until you have the new lake. Well, waiting 5 to 10 years, that's a long time, and we better hope it rains soon. So that has been the push and following up on these meetings.
I like the much shorter timeline on the other slide. I like that slide much better. I know there's still a lot, in my short time sitting up here on council, I've been to many meetings, but one probably 5 years ago, I guess, was a preliminary meeting with TxDOT and with many of the utility companies that have utilities that require relocation around the new Turkey Peak impoundment. And one of your slides mentioned the ongoing issue with TxDOT, and you also mentioned ongoing meetings with the county and these utility companies. Can you give us your perspective of progress toward them being on the same timeline that we need to be on, and how can we, is there something we can do to help keep that timeline process going with other entities besides those of us in the
Great question. In regards to getting the word out there, right? I think the biggest challenge I have is when we've re-engaged a couple of these folks. Oh, we heard down at the coffee shop, that's dead. That's never happened, right? Well, it's not dead. It's very much alive. But when people don't see dozers pushing through a pasture, they just assume, right? So I think the message that the council and the mayor can take out there is you're going to get a call from the district, from HDR, we're moving forward, we have a schedule, we have a path forward, we've secured additional funding, we're on the way to construction. I mean, beating that drum and letting these folks know that it's real and it's coming. And if they haven't got a call already, when we have the financial resource to do so, we will be giving them a call. So I think just beating the drum and just letting folks know, hey, it's coming, it's coming. Drought notwithstanding, all that separate issue, like we're on the path forward for Turkey Peak.
Troy, you were in the audience, you maybe tell me if you're gonna get to this, but you were in the audience when we had the rate study, and Howard has, given some information at other meetings about sort of alternatives, and I know that alternatives have been looked at in the past, and Turkey Peak was settled on, many moons ago, but, are you gonna go over, or could you go over, the quick summary of, why this is this, or confirm what Howard said, this is the best deal for the taxpayer's dollar?
Sure. So the question is about the alternatives to Turkey Peak and kind of how we have it, right? So again, if you go back to my other slide, you have to go back and look at all that history, right? So in order to obtain our 404 permit, we have to do what's called the 404B1 alternatives analysis. And this is from a Corps perspective, but what they're looking for is the least environmentally damaging practical alternative, right? So even before that, we say, here's our purpose and need. This is the amount of water we need, right? So we're talking in terms of water supply needed for the city, the district, for the next 50 years. So a number was developed based off the projections we had at the time, and that is your first layer of filter on all these alternatives. So we looked at Turkey Peak, we looked at raising Lake Palo Pinto, we looked at dredging, we looked at Peacheye Reservoir, we looked at Wilson Hollow, Kettle Hollow, these off-channel pump back storage projects. We looked at going to other major water suppliers in the area, right? And when you filter that through the purpose and need, and then you narrow that down, then you say, okay, and the Corps doesn't let you use cost, so that's the hurdle you have to get through. But when you get to that point, you get a short list. And you look at that short list and you say, okay, what's going to meet our needs? What's going to do everything with the requirements that we have? And for the district, Turkey Peak was the preferred alternative. So then you enter into the regional planning process that the state of Texas has, right? And this is supposed to be a bottoms-up approach to water planning for Texas. The Turkey Peak project was identified, and then through that process, there is a bit of an alternative analysis. Other water strategies are evaluated that the planning group looks at to see if there's a better fit. Along the way, there's never been a better fit for Turkey Peak, right, to meet the needs of the district moving forward. So all those things, either from a cost, a practicability, a permittability, which is a big thing these days, all those things are kind of there. One of the big things that really drove Turkey Peak is the water right permit for Lake Palo Pinto. I don't know if y'all remember, but Lake Palo Pinto, when it was constructed, was never constructed at its full permitted capacity. Turkey Peak recouped that lost capacity, so it basically made our water right hurdle very, very small. If we were building a new reservoir and had to get a new water right to do that, it wouldn't be possible, right? So that knocked a lot of new reservoir projects out of the mix. So there are a lot of things that were in your favor for Turkey Peak, from cost, permittability, practicability, those kind of things that made it unique and the preferred alternative. Does that answer that question? Yeah. Okay.
I think when you're talking about timeline, this project began in 1979. So I know probably for us sitting up here, this will be our only brush with a project, this magnitude and reservoir. Certainly, if you're in the industry, can you speak a little bit to how rare it is to get a project like this to the construction phase? And like I said, is it 1979, so 2029, when it's finished, it's 50 years. Is that normal? Is that an anomaly? Because I hear that a lot, and people are going, I can't believe, this should have been done 30 years ago.
Sure. Yeah, good question. If you go back to the drought of the 1950s, you look at how severe that drought was, and I have stories in my file somewhere of evaporative coolers and hot water heaters all across mineral wells that rusted out because they were diverting directly from the prices because lake mineral wells went dry, right? So there were a lot of people at that time, like the forefathers here in Mineral Wells, that said we need to provide water supply. So you had all the reservoirs around the Metroplex, Lake Palo Pinto, other things in West Texas that were planned for, developed, and constructed. And that construction kind of came to an end about the end of the 70s, early 80s. The last major reservoir in Texas, a lot of people say, is Joe Pool, which I think was 1980s, something there in the Fort Worth area. And then after that, there was, forgive the pun, a big drought of reservoir development in Texas. And from that time, you had things like the Clean Water Act really get some teeth at the federal government, so permitting became more of a challenge. The predecessors to TCEQ took a harder look at water rights, and that became more challenging. So everything's gotten harder for reservoir development as we've gone along. Now, people might say, well, look, well, what about Ralph Hall? What about Lower Bodok? I mean, there's reservoirs being built. Yeah, they've been on the books for like 50 years too, right? It's taken them just as long to get through the process as it's taking us. They have the benefit of an incredibly large, diverse metropolitan area for their rate base, right? For a project this magnitude, for a district the size of Palo Pinto, this is a huge undertaking, and it just doesn't happen very often. And this goes back to some of the stuff that Dean said earlier. You know, a lot of governing bodies don't make those hard decisions to push these projects forward. Because, hey, it rained, it filled up, we're good, right? Rudy mentioned Cisco. I mean, they lost their entire treatment plant from a flood and were on severe water restrictions for months until they got a new treatment plant constructed. So, you know, they had to make those hard decisions because they didn't have any other choice. I think what the water planning process is trying to do at the state level, and the Water Development Board is there to support you every step of the way, best they can, is make these decisions when you're not under drought, right? When you're not under emergency. And, you know, I go to a lot of industry events, people are starting to really have these conversations. A lot of people call this a water legislature because the Texas Water Fund got passed, and I know local area representatives were involved in some of that stuff. So you see a lot of momentum there. Just like after Harvey, there was a lot of discussion about we got to solve the flooding problem, right? So when it gets dry, we talk about water supply. So all that is to say, it is kind of rare. There are 3 going on right now, but it's because people have finally woken up and said, if we don't do this now, when? Because it only gets harder, it only gets more expensive, as Marty said.
You ready to proceed?
I'm good. That's the end. I just had a question slide, but that was a good place to stop and have the discussion, so.
So, and I know there's gonna be a list, that's already been requested and working on of permits that's been applied for, been approved, when those permits expire, et cetera. But being that you're the professional here, what other snake bites do you foresee with Turkey Peak that can cause delays, can cause, because 3 years sounds like a pretty good time frame when I really was probably expecting it to be 2030, and I'm seeing a new water treatment plant at 2030. Anyways, what other, I guess, hurdles do you see jump up at us that could severely slow the project potentially? And how do we try to, I guess, be as best prepared and forward-looking to not have those stop us? Is my question.
Good question. What are the roadblocks, the hurdles we may have to cross? The good news is, I think that list is pretty small at this point. Our permits are in good shape. Our water right, we do have to go back every 2 years to renew it, but that's by statute. That's just something that's been in the water code for a long time. That hasn't been a problem for us. Our 404 permit, we just re-upped it for another 5 years, so we should be good on that one through this. Probably the biggest concern I have is you know, the main topic of discussion tonight, right? We have to be able to fund this project. If we don't fund this project, it's only gonna get more expensive and it's only gonna get more delayed. So really, that's what keeps me up at night. I think I was telling Councilmember Watson, we're closer than we've ever been, right? So many things have come through the last couple of years on this project that we feel really good about it, but we're not quite there yet. So until I see that Caterpillar dozer pushing dirt out there, I may be a little reserved. I'm an engineer by nature, so the glass is always half empty and probably leaking, so.
Thank you.
One more question on the timeline with, you know, as we've seen all over with supply chain issues and causing delays and everything. Is that something that y'all have taken into consideration on these timelines?
We have a little bit. I really think we're starting to see a little bit of correction there. The good news is, for Turkey Peak, we don't have a lot of the motors, pumps, electrical control things that really slow things down. And the good news is, because it takes so long just to do that amount of dirt work, the contractor could order a lot of that stuff up front, so we shouldn't see that supply chain issue. I am interested to see what the contractor feedback is on this type of project. I mean, his number one cost is gonna be fuel and labor. All the other stuff is something I think with this kind of time frame, it shouldn't come back to bite us. We should be in pretty good shape.
I guess I'll ask a hard question. If these bonds were to be issued and approved next month, based on the revenue, which is being raised, proposed,
So it's a really good question, right? Because we've been on this 2025 schedule for a long time, and a lot of our workflow is based off that. What's going to change most is the way we go about doing the work, right? So right now, I've got a certain set of activities that I'm going to do with this $12 million from the Water Development Board for pre-construction. And then we'll go back and we'll get construction funds, and then we'll do everything. If the bond were to pass and that money was available sooner, I could put so many things on that parallel track, all these utilities that are going to be pent up and have to go day one, and we can start firing those off earlier, get them out of the way, to reduce the risk to the contractor from having to deal with those at the same time he's trying to do his stuff. So it really becomes a cash flow and just a very detailed portion of the schedule, right? Some of our mitigation stuff, I'm gonna have to wait till I have those construction funds. Our archaeology, some of that's gonna have to wait. If funds were available today, I can turn those folks loose, and that goes to reducing those roadblocks that we talked about. The sooner we get our mitigation plan fully implemented, the sooner the contractor can actually do his quote-unquote impact to water to the U.S. So if those things are on the same track, he may have to change how he wants to do his sequence of construction until that piece is done. If I could move that piece up, I could have it out of his way completely, and he has more freedom, which means the more freedom you give a contractor, the better price you might have, right? If you're gonna constrain him and say, you can't work in this area until this other contractor finishes their piece, he's probably gonna charge you that one way or another, right? If you get that out of the way and you say, here it is, it's a clean slate, you can't use that excuse on it.
Do you guys know what the rate on these $12 million with Fund Line 1?
I do. So there are two components. There is a taxable piece and a tax exempt. The rate on the tax exempt portion of it is a 3.78%, and the taxable piece is 5.67.
So what does that work out to as a blended rate? Somewhere in the fours? Like if
Right.
we just did all this now ourselves? Okay,
Right.
great.
And the cost of that debt issuance on that SWIFT loan for $12 million is programmed into the district's cost of water to us in your budget for review here later on this evening.
I'll leave you with a picture from Palo Pinto Creek, when there was some really good flow in there one day coming over the Head Channel Dam. A lot of good progress has been made. I know it hasn't been as fast as many of the citizens would like to see, but as we mentioned, reservoirs aren't built in a day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Item number 10, consider and take appropriate action on a presentation and discussion regarding an update on drought conditions.
Yes, Madam Mayor, members of the council, this is just a follow-up to the discussion we had about a quarter ago back in May, middle of May. We had been under drought stage 2 conditions for roughly a month. And as you know, that situation has deteriorated, so at the request of a couple of your members, here's an update on what we had. With regard to the drought, we'll go over the current lake level and the watershed. Corey was out last week, so I'll give you the drought picture, but it's a little bit behind in some of our outlook. And then advancing where we are on stage 2, as well as our preparations that are now, unfortunately, almost imminent, moving ahead. As far as the lake, at 6:15 this evening, that is the lake level. Recall, if you will, when it falls below 857 mean sea level, that will activate our stage 3 triggers and those different protocols. It's lost a little over a foot in the last month, and That rate's been pretty consistent. We didn't get any rain relief this spring, which was June. And Corey, every week, Corey, Howard and I, and Jason and some of you on the council have this water meeting of the drought situation, and unfortunately the long-term projections are not very favorable for any type of measurable or appreciable precipitation falling on our watershed. As far as our watershed, just recapping, the green circle there is Lake Palo Pinto, and the actual watershed for that impoundment runs down around Comanche, Desdemona, along Ranger Hill, and so on and so forth. This is about, what do you think, about 2 weeks old, Corey, give or take. So you can see that the extreme conditions have now encroached on Comanche. They're entering our watershed, and they're kind of following that whole Ranger Ridge line as we've seen in the past. The entire watershed and the lake proper is currently in a moderate with about roughly 62% now approaching the severe drought levels, which coincides with our drought contingency plan. As far as the outlook, here's another slide that we see each week, and this is from the cumulative monthly rainfall gauge out there at Ranger and Strawn. And again, the parallel that Corey showed you is it's tracking along those desolate 2013 lake levels, but the actual rainfall is tracking closer to, or the absence of the rainfall is tracking closer to 2011. If many of you recall, that was very conducive to horrific fires in that area. So we're kind of in between there, but we need some rain. Gerald, we need to get to work, bud. So Corey had showed you a slide, and this is just another iteration of that. We get this updated about every month, but Corey's team attempts to project that, and it's between the orange, which is the 25th percentile, and the 10th percentile worst case scenario, so we're calling that 15. We got a little cold front, yay, right, the last 2 days. It helped from the evaporative loss perspective because the ambient temperatures at night got down below 90 degrees. That's a real positive benefit to slow the evaporative loss. And you know, during the day with these oppressive extreme heat warnings and conditions, as the temperatures continue over 100 and for the next 13 days after tomorrow, it looks like we're in for more of the same. And so we're still fighting evaporative loss. I'll talk about consumption in just a minute. But we are very much tracking on that 10th percentile, and we're making preparations that just after Labor Day, we will more likely than not enter stage 3. Y'all can stop if you have any questions. That higher pressure ridge has just been vacillating between New Mexico, sitting over Texas, and now it's over Louisiana. And that is what is contributing, and unfortunately, although we had a cool front yesterday, there's not enough strength in the upper limits of the atmosphere by cool disturbance or anything to move that high pressure out. There is some relief projected long-term near the end of September, but that is fall for our area, that is seasonal, that is to be expected. To what extent and what benefit from a rainfall perspective, we're just going to have to keep watching. You know, you heard that analogy about, well, it's Texas, if you don't like the weather, just hang around, it'll change. It's not changing right now. So just a real quick update and review. We enacted the stage 2 restrictions after the lake level fell below 861 feet mean sea level. Those restrictions included no outside watering with the exception of livestock and animals, with a goal to reduce consumption by 25%. Construction needs and alternatives were redirected to our effluent and our other alternative use waters. But one of the impediments along the way had been we weren't blending Brazos River water. That had to do with the fact that we did not have a Brazos River water right. Corey, Howard Huffman, a lot of people worked very diligently. We've now secured that right for an extended period of time, which is up into and through most of the projects that some of you have seen tonight. So we have a little bit of assurance. As far as our challenges, they remain the same regarding compliance with our restrictions. So with stage 2 pending, and that could actually occur within the next 10 days, I don't think it will, but this next little heat wave is going to be very problematic and very determinant on how fast that lake falls. When we go to stage 3, all of the stage 2 restrictions are in place. There is a little bit more of an impact on the general service users. For example, a lot of people talk about car washes. Each one of those commercial elements that professes an essential need for water consumption has to resubmit their written application on how they intend to achieve that, what is going to be a mandatory 30% reduction. Jason and I have continuously reviewed as the monthly meter readings come out, those people that have professed that need, including the car washes, and they are all right there, along with our wholesalers that I'll visit with in just a minute. As far as our challenges, as we move into stage 3, we're supposed to RO treat water out of the Brazos at a rate of 2 million gallons a day. Our biggest challenge right now in the post-COVID environment is the supply chain, and we still have about a 5 to 8 month lead time for the rental units. The estimated cost of treating RO water per month is right now at $900 to $1 million per month. That is all the RO units necessary, from microfiltration, ultrafiltration, and the actual membranes, to the piping costs, the electrical costs, and the other costs associated. I'll have a better cost estimate as soon as our water testing sampling from the 2 vendors that had approached and offered remedy to this issue that do rent units. But until we get those numbers and figure out exactly what type of filtration is going to be required, I can't give you a better estimate. And Corey and Howard and I will come back as we get closer to that. The site work is in final design. Recall, if you will, that when it rained in 2015, they didn't finish the site. So the brine water discharge line, the water is taken out of the Brazos, it runs through the filtration. There's a concentration of brine that is returned back. That's a 2.5 mile run. Is that how far it is, Howard? That you have to return it back at a different point on the Brazos. And so the work on that, perhaps with the ARPA funds, but more importantly working with the district and their funds available, we'll get that brine water discharge site so that this site is ready to go and set those units, and it will be moving forward. That cost I mentioned is the unanticipated increase in the expense and may create the need for an emergency water rate. We have to be able to fund the monthly payment on these rental units, and the current water rate structure won't bear that. This is the budgeting time. This is the time this council set water rates. I'm going to talk more about that in your budget work session after the next required activity on the public hearing. But we do need to entertain a discussion on the water rate relevant to this emergency, because it could impact everything that you just heard from Marty and Corey on this update. So I talked about the wholesalers, and a lot of people, you know, they like to say, well, we don't need to sell water to anybody else. Yeah, we do, because we committed to it, and there's a lot of these that are solely dependent on us right now. But against their contracted commitments, all but one are meeting the goal of reduction. But I really want to point out and compliment the wholesalers. Big picture, city consumption and all the wholesalers combined as a group, if you'll notice, for volumetric consumption metered between this month, this year, and last year, it shows a 29.95% reduction in consumption, which aligns with our goal. And if we were able to maintain that with a little more diligence, under stage 3, you're just calling for a 30% reduction. Now, I know everybody can water their yard, people are toting water. We continue to offer the effluent at our water treatment plant. Trevor and his team pretty much need to show up during business hours, but we're trying to support the community on the outside water interest. The effluent is non-potable. It's not fit for human consumption, but for grass, trees, foundations, and whatnot. Did that new car wash come get water from y'all, or did they bring it in? Yeah, so, you know, they got a little gas-powered pump and a tank, and they got the little sprayer thingy out there on the road, but that's not city tap water, that's not your drinking water. Whoops, sorry about that. So the last slide is Corey's, he liked us to give about questions.
So back to the slide, wholesale consumption 2023, because I get a lot of questions about this.
Okay.
There's one of the wholesalers that is not only not reducing, but they're overtaking by a large amount of their contracted amount. And it's the same equivalent, it's about a day's worth of water per month. Like, so what in stage 3 is the remedy for that? Or is there a remedy, or we just allow it to continue to happen? Because I think that really upsets our local folks who can't water their lawn, and they don't want to sell to anybody else, which I think is short-sighted, but what's the remedy?
So I had an extended discussion with our legal counsel retained for the specialty of water purposes on this subject. You know, it's contractual, so there are some steps. There will be a second breach of contract issued. But if you'll think back, a lot of these contracts that emerged back in the late 70s, 80s, mid-80s, there's some language holes in there, and on the advice of counsel, we're navigating those. But to that end, they were billed at the penalty rate under stage 3 conditions, and the drought contingency plan is available online under water customer service. Anybody can read it. Our wholesaler provided with a copy. The penalty rates increase when we go to stage 3, and there's also a pro rata curtailment provision that we have the pro rata diagram for every wholesaler, and it's ready to go if we go to stage 3. There is some notification. They have to be given the benefit of some time to be aware before we implement that pro rata. And right now, I'm trying to, I can't predict the level of the lake, right? But whatever it is, I'm going to try to give them a billing cycle. We read the meter and we bill the wholesalers the first of the month, I think. And I'm trying to give them a cycle to the extent we can to just, we have to give them written notice. It's practical, even if we didn't. All of our customers will receive notice in their water bills. Is that how you send it out, Jason?
Yes.
Yeah, so there's a public notice, kind of like our violation notice, that goes out and lets everybody know, in addition to our website. The alert banner on the top of the website will change from a drought alert to a drought emergency. Other remedies include declaring a local or a county state of emergency, and a lot of things happen when we go to stage 3. But we need to be ROing, and with regard to people with non-conformance, this is when the acceleration of enforcement action and definitive action really starts, because this behavior, this activity is at the expense of everyone now. Where a whole day's worth of water, that's one more day. We're not in stage 3, or that's one more day closer to Gerald's going to do his job. We're going to get some rain. So.
Item number 11, consider and take appropriate action on work order number 1 by Garber Engineering to perform a water loss study on the city's existing water distribution system, including utility benchmarking, staff training, and recommendations for next steps and solutions.
Good evening. especially since y'all are talking about borrowing a huge amount of money. There's been concern about some of the documents on social media about whether they really apply to the city or not, different definitions of loss. And so we started talking to Garver Engineering, and we're gonna get them to review what we've been putting out there and see how it really reflects to the city and what we're doing with water and where it's going. Y'all need to hear from more than just me, y'all need to hear from engineers also.
Yes, Mayor. So Tina Hanson from Garver, she's the engineer and the team lead. She's here tonight. If you have any questions, basically to a portion of the concern expressed earlier, our online Texas Water Development report regarding our water loss audit. It was brought to my attention. I visited with staff. I visited with both of our contract engineers as well as an independent engineer. There are some areas of concern that are delineated in your agenda packet with regard to the amount of loss relative to the total production, and that is the production from the plant out into the distribution. It has no relationship to any kind of evaporation, plant issues, things the district's water supply. This is from the plant. It is metered coming out of the plant. TCEQ, part of our violations, there is a meter down, and we're waiting for the other meters. There'll be a meter at the valve on the release. Right now, we depend on, turning the valve, and some engineer's assessment long ago that if you turn it so many times, that's so many cubic feet per second. But the water will be metered from the time it leaves Lake Palo Pinto until the new lake's in place. The water leaving the Brazos pump station, preset, and out the high house to get a better data measurement. The study is related to in-town, and Tina and her team visiting, if they identify something evident when you look at that water loss report that's in your packet, that is attributable to what appears to be a 50% loss of the produced water in town, then they're going to notify Scott and me that, hey, we think we found the issue. Do you want us to continue further with the more extensive, if it becomes necessary? These anomalies on the water loss started the same year as Winter Storm Uri. So what we're not guaranteed assured of, that there is an undetected subterranean leak or several in our system, but these engineers have the tools and the technical expertise to be able to detect that. We don't think that's the case, but their cost that's there before you, not to exceed $57,000 would be the full extent. And if they identify the issues and the remedies and the solutions in the near term, it'll be less. And then if this council wants us to revisit the HDR study, you checked our people, we'll check your people, let's all check each other. And we can certainly have that discussion, but I have confidence in Garver and Tina and her team to at least identify what's going on with this water loss report, especially over the course of the last 2 or 3 years, because even to the layperson like me, I didn't know anything. Everybody knows what I used to do. There's something going on, and 2 paid engineers and 1 independent one, all of them said, you've got some issues right here, so that's the purpose of this item. You need to add, Tina, jump in there.
So the scope of our work is to really review the data that the city's collected and look for those anomalies. And then based on those anomalies, what would be the recommendation to correct them? We're also doing staff training to make sure that the reporting that's filled out every year to the Water Development Board is per their guidance and requirements as well. So happy to answer any questions.
I see several components of your work description. I'm real curious, boots on the ground, heck, you know, I understand you want to look at, previously reported data. I'm curious, do y'all physically inspect a lot of the system? Is there a way that you put, flow sensors on the system to determine if there's a quadrant of town or a particular line that is showing abnormal flow? I'm having a hard time wrapping my brain around how your report gives me actionable steps to take to reduce what I already know is happening.
Right. So part of our work is to look at your system and the age of your water lines, material water lines. So, you know, typically cast iron water lines downtown, that's usually the problem oftentimes, or can be. You know, we're seeing that several utilities in this drought condition are experiencing that. So that would be the kind of information that we're looking for. Now, actually installing meterings and tracking down exactly where it is, that would be that recommended next step that would come out with, you know, here's the cost to take these next steps and what we would recommend you do to correct it. We have to understand the problem before we can recommend how to correct it. So this step is to understand the problem.
I think we all already know a lot of our problems. We're in North Texas, we have a lot of clay soil, there's a lot of ground shift, especially in the drought, wet.
Right, correct.
Ground moves, pipes don't like it when the ground moves.
Especially cast iron. Yeah.
It wouldn't surprise me that is part of our issue. It was mentioned there's possible some subterranean leaks going on that we're not aware of yet, and so I was hopeful that there would be some way that you could maybe help us narrow down where that's going, but it sounds like it might be a little tougher than I would like to.
Yeah. Ma'am, on your, let's see, oh, it's on the water development board sheet in our packet where it talks about water loss, and then it has subcategories of water loss, and one of them is real loss, and that breaks down into reported breaks and leaks, which everyone understands, and then there's unreported loss. So there's an unreported loss, but we know how much it is, or is that just a guess? So what would that, I mean, I think that's what common sense would say we're concerned about, is the unreported loss, but we have a number. So what would that be? So the unreported loss would be probably, you have a meter coming out of your water plant, right? And then you have your meters that all your customers, you're reading every month for your customers. And then you may have, so there's going to always be a delta between what, you know, all your retail customers and, you know, what you're metering to your customers and what's coming out of the water plant. And then there's some categories of water loss for municipal use, for, you know, if you have to flush the water lines, or fire, if you have a fire, and those sorts of things. So it's that delta of can't explain what that water is. It can be a metering errors because retail meters aren't always 100% accurate.
But basically, you just told me what it was, you know, so it's kind of strange. It's like
a delta.
We put in estimated meter accuracy 90% to 99.5% on different meters and their age, and they take that based on they put it to the system and they come up with numbers like that.
I'm familiar with parts of the reporting process, and you know, some of it's educated guess, fire flow, use, parts of
of our system require a lot of flushing. You know, we're either fortunate or unfortunate that the federal government left us a huge several miles of pipeline that are really large pipe, and they have very few users on them now, and
That's on the
but we still have to flush large lines to continue to provide them with really good water, which I'm proud of. We still have really good water, just not much of it at the moment.
And if that number of the fires and the flushing and leaks shows up as a non-revenue water.
Right,
It's
I know,
very
and
high.
it's still estimated, and, but yeah, we still have a huge loss, and so I'm certainly willing to, engage you guys to try to help us figure out what that is, where it's going.
When, I'm looking at this and seeing, you know, the emphasis on data collection and then staff training, you know, do we have any indicators, or is there any potential that it is actual physical water lost, or do we maybe have a disconnect with the data and the reporting and that kind of thing? So, you know, we could be getting the numbers mixed up and we're not actually losing that amount of water, is that?
That's correct, that's a possibility, that's why we want to look at the data to see if there's anomalies and to determine whether it's, how it's being reported, is there a problem, or is it actual loss in the system and how to correct it?
They'll check, see if we make mistakes on the reporting and categorization. It's worth looking at.
Do we have any, I guess that's why we're doing this, we don't have any indication yet of where we think the issue might be, whether it's on the data side or the actual physical water side. You'll be able to distinguish which one of those areas was the issue at the end of this study?
Yes.
I think a lot will show up on the data side. There's a lot of numbers there that can be verified and get more accurate.
Scott, is this something that, this type of study, I know obviously they don't have the amount of lives differences, most of the citizen concerns, I'm not saying that they're like the actual concerns, but I hear a lot about the water that disappears between their properties and our property. Is this something that the district could do as well as a water loss study? Because if this is designed to alleviate our own concerns and the public's concerns that we're losing water, I don't think it does any good unless the district undertakes a relevant study related to its role. Because we're really all the same thing.
I think they have a real good idea of what's evaporating where in different places.
Thank you.
What's the time frame?
I believe we have it in the contract, but I think it's about 4 months, I believe, something like that.
How would this be funded?
How far back are you gonna look at the data? You do this 1 year, 2 years?
As long as they want to go, we have 25 years of data that we read.
25 years would take a while, wouldn't it?
Yeah, they're probably 5 or 10 years.
Yeah, something like that.
Well, we can see on the graph where the uptick happened, that's a pretty good indicator, right? Of where something changed right around Winter Storm Uri.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you. Council, any further questions or discussion points from Pam? Thank you.
I make a motion, we approve of work order number 1 to Garber Engineering to perform water loss study on the city's existing water distribution system.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? No. Any abstentions? Motion passes 6-1-0. Item number 12, consider and take appropriate action on the adoption of an ordinance amending ordinance number 2022-20 for the fiscal year 2022-2023 budget.
So I thought we would like to move a little bit. I'm gonna try and save some money and just reallocate it. So, for amendments to the budget, pursuant to city charter, we are required to present an ordinance. In going through the budget painstakingly these last few weeks, we've seen a very healthy general fund balance and a not as healthy water fund balance. As you know, in 2022-2023, a total of $1.88 million was allocated to be transferred from the water fund into the general fund. The ordinance before you will amend that water fund transfer out for just 3/4 of that amount, thereby refortifying the water fund by $472,000, and obviously the same amount not being funded to the general fund. We're still pretty healthy in the general fund, doesn't really affect it at all. However, that is the ordinance before you.
Just for the education opportunity, will you kind of go over the purpose of that fund transfer from the water fund to the general fund as far as covering expenses that the city
Absolutely.
incurs from?
I'm gonna have to have Mr. Sullivan's help.
The relationship of
Yes.
the two?
No, so inter-fund transfers typically are, as you know, our revenue on the water fund is from water sales. When our general fund wasn't doing as well, or when we needed raises, or when we needed decision packages, a specific amount was allocated every year in order to make that happen, without trying to raise taxes all that much, without trying to do any other revenue altering on the general fund side. So we would, I don't want to say rob Peter to pay Paul, but it was an inter-fund transfer from one fund, which is an enterprise fund, to the next fund, which is your tax-based ad valorem fund. So I believe maybe the year before I got here, it was kind of set at 1.88 million, and we would take that quarterly payment of 472,000 and bring it over to fortify all of those things within the general fund. And as I stated before, general fund's looking pretty healthy, looking pretty stable. With all of this coming down the pike on the water fund side, city manager just believes, with my opinion as well, that we need to stock up the water fund before moving forward.
So in the budget proposed for your consideration, I dropped that back to 600,000. That is reflective of the compensation relative to the street work and administrative costs borne in the general fund. The street department is funded through ad valorem. Meanwhile, all the water distribution, the sewer components are funded through the water fund. You know, I'm not a big fault finder. It looks like probably as far back as 2008, that water fund transfer just steadily grew. And it had been the intention of a prior administration, and perhaps at the direction of council, against all of our water needs, to start, you know, weaning the general fund off of that and try to put more back into our infrastructure and our water fund needs. you know, the general fund is healthy. We didn't get a lot of things done. Our street program, Chris and his team, very few of them that we have done what they could, but our general fund is healthy, and so it may be a reversal of fortune as we walk into the cost associated with this impending water crisis, and we may need to transfer some funds over there, much like has almost been done on the airport in years past, to keep our water flowing and our, you know, emergency necessities going. But as I looked at it and was reviewing the final budget after all your discussions, I found there was still a fourth quarter fund transfer in the amount of $472,350 that we hadn't made. And that is the purpose of this amendment pursuant to your charter, is I'm recommending we not make that transfer out of the water fund to have a little bit healthier water fund. It really hasn't ever recovered since the 2014 drought cycle, and here we are again. Some of that may have contributed to the time delays that we discussed this evening, but that's my recommendation to you, and as well as we'll address it in your budget consideration coming up.
Questions? Discussion?
Make a motion, we approve the ordinance amending the annual budget as presented.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion passes 7-0. Conduct a public hearing on the proposed fiscal year 2023-2024 annual budget. We open our public hearing at 8:19. Is there anyone present that wishes to speak on 2023-2024 proposed budget? None present. Close the public hearing, 8:19.
Do what?
You don't have anything to add to that, I'll just move on. Item
I
number.
don't, it's a requirement, so.
Gotta do it. Item number 14, conduct budget work session.
Yes, Madam Mayor, members of the council and the community, there have been no line item increases. Part of the necessity was the activity that just took present on the prior item. We are, sorry, my papers got stuck, that was weird. We are recommending a tax rate of 0.5930 in the upcoming budget year.
5939.
5939, sorry, getting tired. That tax rate is higher than the no new revenue rate and the voter approval rate, but it is lower than the de minimis rate and the voter approval rate at 8%. We discussed with you previously, and Stacy Choate's been a great assistance on our unused increment. This does not leverage that. We are not going up to the voter approval rate at 8%. This is below that. As I mentioned in the last budget talk, we had almost 100% of this is shoring up our employment situation relative to the evolving market. If we don't have any employees to do the work, we're not going to get our streets fixed. Our water crews are now approaching, you know, just absolute fatigue. And this council took action on the fiber, and then the ground shifted, and it got worse. So if we can't pay a market wage, and hopefully, you know, maybe we'll attract some of the people that leave town every day and go out of town to work. But we got to try something, because if we don't have the workers, and we're going to have to shift gears with more outsourcing. I do have a meeting in a couple of weeks with a nearby community to discuss potential partnerships on some of our needs with regard to water crews and street crews, to see if You know, because I know they're experiencing the same thing. And I came from a partnering environment where, you know, when you're down, you all pull together. And I don't think any of us are going to navigate it. You remember when we had the discussion with the county, they're still experiencing some of the same employment issues and these heavy equipment operators and such. I hadn't had a chance to follow up with the schools on if they were able to advance our technical program, maybe start teaching some of these young people how to drive a tractor. It's pretty sexy, you gotta try it. And more importantly, just what? Tractors are sexy, man. It's a song. That's not politically incorrect. But lawyers, you gotta love them, right? No offense. Yes, you gotta use them. But it's just been a real challenge, and if we don't stabilize the workforce, and I feel strongly about our employees, this isn't a money grab, but we gotta figure out what's it gonna take to get people to wanna work here and do the work, because if we don't have any employees, all this is for naught. I guess we can surrender to the county. Maybe that's the plan. I'm always suspicious. So, as far as your workshop, at this point, we've heard a lot of information, and I expressed it to y'all. I wanted to be as transparent on the current status of the situation, what all's involved, take your charge. We had meetings with the water district. We've had meetings with the various wholesalers, and here you are. And all the while, this drought situation kind of escalated, which, as I explained earlier, has potentially changed the game plan. And so now I'm going to defer to you. I need some direction so I can set a water rate, so I can set a budget. You've seen the scenario that includes a rate to fund all things. New water treatment plant, that's a need. The pipeline from Brazos to Brazos Pump Station, the lift stations that are part of OTCQ violation, the effluent recovery, which is a potential fund that we could get some assistance on, and then ultimately the lake. That is one scenario. You've seen the rates. Councilman Maldonado, we did extend the terms to get the affordability of that rate. As the first rates were introduced, they were on 20 and 30-year terms. That was pretty steep for a home at the time. It was going to go from $104 a month for a family up to $252. We changed that term. That same cost to that family, funding all of this, taking on this rate, dropped it down into the $220 a month range. The other option, in light of what the cost of this RO to continue to provide drinkable water to our community at a cost that right now is showing out to be $900 to $1 million a month, is for you to adopt a base rate. And that was at the request of Councilman Kelly. He did a base rate, which was just the rate projections to maintain the status quo relative to consumer pricing index and rate adjustments for the next 5 years. With that base rate, there's not enough funds to run that RO for more than a couple of months. So you would have to consider enacting an emergency water rate, or there is something called a drought surcharge. We have visited with the rate consultant as well as legal counsel on the subject of a drought surcharge. It is permissible under your drought contingency plan, and if we were to declare an emergency for that purpose. I want to be very clear that if we were to implement a drought surcharge, this would be in addition to the base volumetric rate that is assessed for water. The sewer is not impacted by this. As of about 3:30 today, that rate would currently be $16.44 per 1,000 gallons consumed for all customers. Retail service, general service, business, industrial, wholesale, and that's per $1,000, or per 1,000 gallons, excuse me. That's pretty steep. It's only in effect for the time we have the RO, so we don't necessarily have to start charging it tomorrow. And once the emergency subsides and the RO is no longer needed, then that drought surcharge has to go away to the extent if you have any, debt or any costs still outstanding, but in very short order. Something similar did happen back in 2014, and the rates were supposed to go up temporarily, and they did come back down after that was over. But this is different. This is the drought surcharge because this is a pretty big cost that was unanticipated. I can put these up, Ryan, if you want. You don't have to turn them on, but I can. It's entirely up to y'all. I can put these rates up under the scenario that is with all the capital improvements in the lake. Sorry about that, Ryan.
I have a question while he's doing that. You mentioned, emergency, disaster, think about declarations on a state level. We don't want to have to declare one of those, obviously, until we get to that imminent point. But when would that be, in your opinion? Do you know? Have you looked at that? And then, would there be any potential relief from the state?
Right, and so Marty and Rudy had to leave, but we'll be in very heavy consultation with them with regard to any state financial assistance if we are in fact in a local state of emergency or water emergency. There is another layer, which is a local disaster, and that would be akin to the situation that occurred in Cisco a few years ago. And under a disaster, there is definitely some emergency funding, some federal and state action like you would expect in a disaster. From a local emergency, state of emergency perspective, in town or extending to the county, as many of our customers are in the county, they're part of our wholesale complement. To what extent Marty and Rudy are versed in this, they're aware that I will be calling them when we get to stage 3. As far as the when, that is very much going to be determinant on these vendors for that RO equipment, and then all the costs necessary to bring that site up to speed, get our TCEQ permitting right. It has to be permitted just like a water treatment plant. When we have a declared emergency, that will be expedited. We have that with some degree of confidence. I'm going to be nice about yesterday's conference call. That was interesting. But, so a lot of things will happen very rapidly. There may be instances for this body to convene under emergency sessions with a 24-hour notice as we need to advance certain things. We're trying to get all this laid out so that, we're not reacting to the emergency, we're preparing ahead to the extent that we can and trying to get ready. Did that answer your question? So I was talking about the base rate. Yeah, so to your point, Councilman Kelly, this was the base rate if we did no lakes, no capital improvements, nothing. And so this would be the current rates on the tier structure for residential, 5, 7, 9 gallons if you use that much. Irrigations are shut off now, and then here's your business rate. And this would be the cost escalation based on the rate consultant, just all things being equal, doing nothing. That was a question. And then the wholesaler rate's the same as general service. And we provided this to you before, and they gave some examples, okay? I'm going to leave it right here on the residential. That is, that's the bulk. 86% of our connection base is residential. So when we look at the same thing with all the scenarios, this was the proposed escalating rate with those things on 30 and 40-year terms, Mr. Maldonado, and having the, I forgot the word, hold on. Having the council resolve to the debt issuance associated with those projects that were listed not to exceed an amount that we have put forward to you on the cost, which is, that $287 million. So I don't know how to do side by side. I am a little bit technically challenged. That's not too bad. So, base rate only, Kyle, goes up to 642 in the coming year. But don't forget, we will need to enact a drought surcharge to cover the cost for as long as we need those RO machines.
That'd be an additional
$16.44 per 1,000 gallons of volumetric consumption meter billed consumed. That's 642. And then this is the volumetric increase with the projects proposed. Hold on, Corey, I gotta get your slide back up here. I have Corey's presentation for y'all, and I wanted to talk with the council and our community members present and watching. Have got the years on it?
Yes, sir.
Okay. My screen's a little bitty. That's not much better, is it? Hold on, let's do this way. He's like my kid, right? You gotta have the young guy. I got a new phone, fix it or whatever. All right, so, one of the things, if we're looking at a $1 million a month expense, you got it, Carl? There's been a lot of conversation about the Public Works complex. My thinking on that was something akin to Fort Walters when it was given to the city. There was some investment, there was a plan, and yet, how's that working out? So when we got the gift of the Devon property, and it had been discussed by the prior administration to put a new Public Works complex on there and utilize that property because of what's on there, and it fit. And I've been very transparent about that. Drought, stage 3 RO is changing the game. So what I would tell the council and the community is that's $10 million, that's 10 months of RO. That goes to the very end of the list, and if at the end we can fund it, we'll do the best we can. If we can't, that's it, because we'll need that 10 million if we're in this drought for 10 months and we're in stage 3 for 10 months. And we can look at everything except for the 4 principal things the district has been working on: raw water line, Brazos, treatment plant, Turkey Peak. So this rate structure, we haven't issued any debt yet. This is the rate structure that supports the debt. It's going to be this, well, it'll be higher if we follow the timeline of, we saw the accordion one, this one, it's going to be higher. We know the cost is increasing. The drought changed that. I don't have a crystal ball either. It's just, we're going to have to, if we go to RO, that cost is not negotiable. It's not something that, that's the cost of it today. Hopefully it comes down a little bit. Corey's here. I don't think it's going to come down appreciably more than maybe $100,000 or $200,000 a month, just the way that everything is pouring out to RO treat that water. We're hoping that when they're clear on, we just want to rough the water. We're not trying to treat it to quality drinking water standards. We're not trying to introduce it. We just need the salt and the heavy solids and contaminants to the extent of the roughing necessity. Hopefully the cost won't be that much, but this is the quoted cost we have, and that's why I'm putting it to y'all. I just need some direction. Consider that Proposal A, the base rate with the drought surcharge implemented. It'll be included on your water rate for consideration and adoption in September. I told you what the amount is right now. That could come down. It's not going to go up right now unless something weird happens, but that would be your drought surcharge in effect. And option 2 would be, consider that rate you're looking at, Kyle, for the whole thing, and then we manage those projects to the extent necessary to weather this storm and get some things done. If we only adopt the rate, the base rate with the drought surcharge, you're just paying rent on something and it kept us in water for how long that is, but at the end of the day, you're right where you are today, except for maybe the lake's full and I guess we wait another 8 or 9 years. So this was your charge to me, this is what I'm bringing. This drought situation, this cost is significantly more than was anticipated in 2014. The delays, I did check and see what the cost would be to purchase it. We need 6 units, right? Yeah, roughly $9 million a unit, because I thought, well, we'll be smart, right? We'll just buy them. We're gonna get all this money, right, Brandon? Just kidding. But we could buy them, and then we can certainly put them over to help our new plant, right? So we would always have an RO component. At $9 million a pop for, 6 of them is $54 million, and that's not enough plant to supply our town, plus the operational cost is about 3 times as much. So I'm not trying to take away from the budget workshop, I just wanted to get this in front of you. I kind of need some direction from y'all on A or B, because it will affect the budget you do see when we finally put it before you for consideration. Thank you.
I just want to make sure I understood what you were saying about the public works complex. Are you saying that we would go ahead and adopt the rates as presented, but take that off the project list and say, probably not going to happen, or maybe, or because how much? Because obviously we need that. Say that was $10 million. We don't need $10 million. That would spread out over 30 years. But this, we need $10 million right now. So how would you repackage that project, or would it just go away? I wasn't sure what you were saying.
If we put it to the end of the timeline on this 5-year initial rate issuance that is the shock to conscience, oh my goodness. We put it towards the end of the project line. So right now, we got everything started, and if we were to do everything tomorrow, here's your timeline. And kind of like you were talking about, Carlos, where if we're hitting the draws, and we're not going to draw for Public Works Complex, and we're going to weather this storm, get to work on some of these things. But Public Works would be the first we would sacrifice if push came to shove. If this council was resolved to the issuance of $287 million in revenue bond debt issuance for the purpose of constructing A, B, and C relative to this project, we would make it conditional. We're in an emergency, and if we have to scrap that, and it's like any kind of big capital improvement project that you just don't go in there just blowing it all. You're trying to save money where you can. So we'll be very diligent and vigilant, and I told you we would continue to pursue support. But if we have to give up something and you want to consider adopting this rate, it'll make a lot of people happy, I guess. Public Works Complex is gone. My concern was the property. If you don't invest in that property, then you might as well give it back.
Well, that was gonna be probably my question, Dean, is I know with Public Works Complex and moving some stuff, there's the potential to open up some land for a lease to a commercial lease program to a business. Is the Devon property currently today, is this where we could lease that to a potential and look at that as, it's not a huge offset, but that's something that still, if we were able to get that done, you're able to then do something with those funds to help somewhat offset or save up for later on potential use.
We haven't looked at that, so you'd have to give me a little bit of time. I would say that, desperate times, desperate measures, that's a possibility. I would offer, though, that it was there. There was a very kind tenant that, and that property's been closed for a long time. And, maybe it's just marketed for sale, I don't know, but You know, I'm sure somebody will rent it for what, I don't know that, to what extent they would utilize it, but that's a possibility, yes, sir.
I think along the same line of Kyle, thinking about, we're putting a property package together also of all of the properties that the city of Mineral Wells has, and I think there may be some opportunities there for the sale of some properties that are surplus to us that will be able to fund that project at a later date.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard the concerns about including that, and again, my intention wasn't to ramp up the overall cost. I was more concerned about having a piece of property given to you that if you don't act now, I mean, come on, be honest. Look at the fort. So yeah, there's different ways. I do have that, most of that property catalog now. I've been slowly reviewing it. This could be along the same lines to that extent. And so, you know, we can certainly, if that's your direction, we'll have to see if we can get it re-rated before our ordinance. But we can move that 10 million off and go at it a different way. I was worried that if we didn't act, it could end up like another property that everybody's familiar with, and I didn't want to be responsible for that.
I don't know that we want to move the $10 million off on a package that size. I think the difference would be fairly inconsequential. But we don't have to make that draw either. First, I'm looking for Marty like she's sitting over here.
Yeah, she left.
But
I do have the difference, by the way, and I don't have it here right now, and I apologize. I should have anticipated that. I do have the difference. We took it out of the wholesale cost regardless, and it is not there, and I have the exact number. I just don't have it, and I apologize. I'll get it to you though.
So, what, essentially what you're saying is, if we go to stage 3, we have to, the cost of our water, there's gonna be an additional cost of $1 million a month estimated. Or if we approve this rate and issue these bonds, it's gonna be the same increase, essentially.
Well, depends on how much water you use, but actually, hold on a second.
Well, I mean,
It's actually going to be more. It's going to be more under the surcharge in the immediate. It's significantly more. Over the long term, no, because you have this base rate right here of this $6.42. Now you're going to tack on another $16.44 for every 1,000 gallons consumed. So that's huge. I mean, just this little family right here on the screen using 2,000 gallons, you're talking about another $32, so they end up paying $38 on their water costs there. That's the hit. But it's only for the period of the emergency. As soon as the emergency subsides and any cost obligations are settled, that surcharge must go away.
so option A, we kicking the can down the road, still. Option B.
His word, not mine.
Yes, take action, obviously pushing the project, Public Works to the end, giving us a few years to recover from.
Potentially.
And still complete all projects, essentially.
Right, and Kyle, you were asking Corey, and Carlos is aware. We do strongly believe that with the Brazos pump station and with the pipeline, we can make some system improvements relative to getting back up to where we thought we were, which could be conducive of supporting our wholesalers and our own growth, remedy that TCEQ violation. Still need a new water treatment plant, supply and demand, right? We gotta have a lake, too, actually. But it's a little bit of a risk, but there's some security and reassurance. It's just a matter of unfortunately, I need y'all to tell me which way to go now, because the droughts changed that, and I can't absorb $1 million a month cost against any of your budgets. Not $1 million a month.
My personal opinion is that we need to go ahead and do the rate for all the projects, because otherwise, if we just do an emergency rate, people are not gonna see one thing for their money, and then we're gonna have to sit and do this next year when it's, quite a bit more. I'm like 100% over talking about it. I
I mean, I think if we can,
While adding $2.4 million
right,
to the
right,
cost.
I think that, to me, it's a no-brainer. And, I mean, that's the direction that I would hope that the group's wanting to go. Is that we wanna see for something firmly and get going.
And I don't need a vote or anything, I just need some direction from the 7 of you so I can finish this legal budgeting process and set a rate. But this issue, what do you think about the past 8 days or so, Corey? This has come up very quickly, and as we're getting data in, and all of a sudden, I thought the 2014, I should have known, right? But, and this is like, I had to say, whoa, and so this is why I need y'all, no matter which way you believe, I need y'all to tell me where you want to go now.
So, just for reference, we've got secured the agreement for 2,000 acre feet of Brazos River water a year.
Yeah, that's correct, and that is already in the budget, programmed into the cost, along with the $12 million worth of new debt issuance for the projects with the district. Those are already in your O&M and debt service cost in your water fund budget that is before you now.
So, once we start RO, and this, I know this is not necessarily on this, but it's something that I'm just intrigued on. So, we start RO, and I know right now at 1 million gallons a day, we're not necessarily maximizing that 2,000 acre feet a year. Do we have the contracts in place if we need, I guess, once we start RO, and are we gonna maximize the full 2,000 acre feet a year?
Right, so the RO setup is, you're good, and I'm not cutting these guys off, but they're enjoying this, I promise you. It's like a test. All right, so right now we're blending 1 million gallons a day directly out of the Brazos into the diversion pond. It dilutes with the fresh water, pumped up the hill into preset, sits for 30 days, gets treated. When we go to RO, as the level of the lake drops to that stage 3 trigger level. So now we're not blending anymore, we're pulling 2 million gallons a day directly out of the Brazos. We're roughing it, in other words, we're trying to get it to a level of water quality that kind of meets the composition, is that a good word, or whatever, the makeup of our freshwater impoundment and our preset. So there's like 5 or 6 different sampling points that we want this company, whoever can do it, we want to rough that water in, and we're going to pull out 2 million gallons a day, take additional pressure off the lake to help further augment our water needs as we endure this drought.
Yes, sir. Yeah, you got me there. That was the main thing I was looking for was, will we stop blending and do it all through RO? And that's...
No, the one thing that and this, check in here, Corey, if you want to, is we're going to need to jump on this effluent recovery because that's another 1 million gallons that we don't necessarily have to wait on because that is, it's already come through the system and whatever, and it goes out the other system and then it gets treated. It does, and then it's just going back down Pollard. So we need to participate with this federal deal, which is, if I read it right, we should qualify based on our socioeconomic vulnerability index. That's a big word. Write that down. I want you just to write that in the paper. We should qualify really for 50%, but I can't promise that. It looks like all the metrics. So this is where Marty and this team is very helpful. But if we can get that effluent recovery sooner rather than later, again, the 7 million in the prospectus, that's the estimate we got from the engineers. And so as soon as we can get that million, that's a 1 million gallon staple, right? That is stable, million reintroduced, 1 million gallons a day less pressure on our supply, the lake, whichever one, offset evaporative loss, whatever the comparison. While we're having to do RO, that's 2 million, so we're 3 million up. And right now, during this stage 2 period, and I complimented the residents and the wholesalers and the businesses alike, we're running right just under 4 million, about 3.8. Is that fair, Scott? Some days it's a little higher, but the water guys are doing great with all these leaks, so that gets us by, right? But that's the disturbing thing about this RO rental cost, nothing's getting fixed. So They're just wanting to.
No, I just want to direct the conversation to the budget, not the.
This is related to the
Providing
water
waters.
rate budget, I mean, it's related to the cost.
Okay, so
Okay.
you say so.
No, I mean, it's all related to the cost of rate 1 versus rate 2, and I need their decision so I can have direction
All
on
right.
which rate to put in our budget.
All right,
It
just
really
seemed
is
it went a
promise.
little on to the underlying water issue rather than the costs, but, okay.
Okay, you're right. So I need a decision.
Sorry, I got you off. Thanks, Kyle.
I'll chime in with Councilwoman Watson. I'm not a fan of kicking the can down the road anymore. I think we need to go ahead and implement a new rate and not worry with an emergency rate and then still have to do what we know we have to do. So my direction would be, let's just implement this new rate and move on.
You don't know my opinion on this. B, you have to be here.
My sentiment is exactly.
The rest of it is really if there's any issues in the budget, general fund, water fund, airport fund, any of the funds, and we get the book wrapped up, get the ordinances drafted, and then get you,
That right here does include all of them. So we wouldn't need to amend the budget with any budget line item increases. Just wanted to get that out there.
Do you want to talk about the meeting we were invited to today? And, well, it's the line, would be a line item.
Oh, yes, you're right.
Oh, is
Good
that
job.
on Texas?
However much we want to put into.
I don't know, reserve, we'll probably want to keep those reserves.
Do you want to explain to people?
Yes.
They heard from me last time we weren't here.
Yes, so no, we
Okay.
had sorry, mine doesn't have a battery tonight, I'm trying to be loud. We had a meeting at Nick Leonardo's office this morning, and his district director, Gary Gorman, Texas Neighborhood Services Director as well, that serves this 7-county area on the potential of utilizing their existing services and in an effort to provide bill relief for the citizens of Mineral Wells. And so it's actually, it's common. They have several other providers, particular electric providers, that they partner with in order to do that for certain areas. So there's kind of already a process in place for that. There wouldn't be any administrative costs associated with that. So anything that the city did wish to contribute to that relief fund would go directly to the relief for the consumer. And the focus is on the vulnerable population, but none of those decisions would have to be made, you know, at any point right now. That is an option that is in the works. And, you know, not that that's the only option, but that was a good one, I think, a viable one that we had a good meeting with today. What else?
How much is in unallocated reserves? And my thought was that that would be the general fund, which has so generously been supported by the water fund. Maybe we can use some of our savings to direct that back to people, helping people with water.
So I have 100 in both funds, general and water, and then at the end, as we get into the emergency situation, we'll probably have some budget amendments anyway, so we can take those up in quarter pursuant to the charter. And if we need to move some more to support, we could do that. Right now, there's $100,000, I'm pretty sure that's right, in both funds, water and general, as unallocated for emergencies. That's the whole purpose of an unallocated reserve.
That would be enough to start with, I think.
So if there, if we need it for an amendment.
Yeah, so
later date once
if we exhausted the unallocated reserve, is 100 each, right?
It's 103,000 for general fund and 85 for the water fund.
So, anyway,
So we don't have to make any changes to the budget?
no ma'am,
to
it's
proceed
not a
in that
line item
direction?
increase. I mean, you could, it's not gonna change the tax rate, there's some publication deals, but I'm expressing to y'all, it's not necessary. You have 100,000, 85 in the water fund, so if it became necessary, let's say the situation with the drought or whatever, we can always do a budget amendment, and we'll probably end up doing one of those anyway. If things don't get better and we have to move money out of the general fund reserve and into the water fund. I'm sorry. Get y'all compelled by it, so I didn't hate it. But we will, so I reasonably anticipate this budget year, you're gonna have a couple of amendments. Just because of the situation and the unknowns of, you know, this emergency as it relates to budgeting, and that's just the way it works.
Anything else on budget workshop? Okay.
Yeah, I have a comment or two. It's not really a question. I just want to commend our city manager and our finance director for the work that they put into this and continue to put into it, and its ever-changing status every day. This is my 7th budget, I guess, 6th or 7th. And they've all been a little different, but I believe this one's been the most challenging. But I really want to thank you for listening to this council and taking care of our people. Every year at this time of the year, I sit up here and I look at our city employees that are in the audience. And this year, as with every year, and I've heard you say it several times, you know, I can have the shiniest, prettiest fire truck, or I can buy a new backhoe, but if I don't have somebody to operate it, all of the things that the people over here in this side of the room want done ain't gonna happen. With respect to some of the decision packages that you guys put before us, didn't make it this year, and I don't like that either. But the priority was to try to take care of you guys. And I hope you realize that and recognize that. There is only one decision package that I want to have a question about, and I think it is one that, when it was originally presented to us, I think it said that there was possibly a grant opportunity, and that's the ballistic shields for your police officers, chief. Is there still an opportunity to, and is it your intention to try to get that $45,000 or $55,000 it was toward your officers' ballistic vests? Is there a grant opportunity for that? So, because we didn't necessarily fund it, you can still go after that grant, correct?
Yes, sir.
And you do intend to do that?
Yeah.
I would really like for those officers to be able to have those vests. And if we don't get the grant, I guess sometime later in the year, I can ask for us to have a budget amendment, and we can put those funds in there, and maybe you can buy them even if you don't get the grant. That's the only, that was a hard one for me to sit on and go, man, I hate that one fell off.
It opens September 1st, and we fully intend to put in for it, so.
And would you have any idea about what part of the year would you know if that's funded or not, where we would need to make a decision to get that money to you if we possibly could?
Yeah, I think by the end of the year, I should know something.
Okay.
Bureau of Justice Assistance, or which one?
This one's to the governor's office.
The state of Texas governor? They need to Just for clarification, so this is the kind of vest that are for the high-powered rifle type deals. This is, every officer has a vest. It's required. We get assistance from the Bureau of Justice Assistance on a reimbursement on those vests, but this is next level up.
Yeah.
Again, Councilman, thank you first off, and I didn't do this. Those people sitting here did. Time to go?
No!
See, okay. I've been very reserved in this budget. I explained that to y'all, and I explained to you why, because of the uncertainty. We can look first quarter, second quarter, some of those awards that Chief Dennison just mentioned. They'll release those around March or April. So as the year moves along, Councilman Maldonado and some of the other issues, we'll just keep an eye on it and assess it. If we keep our employees, we're able to attract, recruit some employees, get some work done on our roads and everything that, you know, we put the money out there, but the money won't do the road, right? We can look at maybe picking up some of those other budget things, and again, that's why, not for that reason, but that is why I anticipate there'll be a couple of amendments this year. The cost that he's talking about on those vests, you know, operationally, we can make that happen. We didn't not fund it or approve it for a lack of respect to the interest, the need of the element. It just had to do with, at the end of the day, against all the other needs. And there is a grant that I feel comfortable, if the grant comes through, we can make the rest of it happen.
Yeah, I agree, and I understand that they have, it's not the first line of protection, this is it's a little higher level, protection. But turn on the news any day, and I want our guys to have the best level protection, to back up the statement I make every week I put up here, and that's it. I appreciate you guys, it's our job to make sure you have what you need, and I want your guys to have the best.
Item number 15, consider and take appropriate action to conduct a vote to approve the proposed tax rate.
As Dean mentioned earlier, when discussing the budget, this budget was based on a proposed tax rate of 0.59390000 per 100 valuation. He also discussed that this is less than the voter approval tax rate at 8%, less than the de minimis rate. Therefore, we don't need an election to choose this rate. However, it is greater than the no new revenue rate. So therefore, we do need a vote because it will, in essence, increase property taxes.
Yes, we do need a regular vote.
Yes, I'm sorry, this should be by record. I was waiting for the city clerk to comment on that, make sure.
For the very reasons that Joel just delineated to a person at this dais, we said we wanted to take care of our people.
I'm sorry, we're first gonna need a motion before we, so is this, are you about to vote? Okay, so we'll need a motion first, and then we can go through the roll call.
So we'll rewind. Receive your comment, then we'll take a motion, then we'll take the vote. Perfect.
The city manager did listen to the council and to our direction on that.
every department of this city has had many vacancies all year long. And the feeling was we wanted to address the compensation of those who are working. And so that, I wanted to say what Doyle said, and I at least wanted to echo that before I voted for the tax rate. Thank you, Dean Sullivan, for listening to the heart of this council in regard to our city.
So I have a suggestion. If there's any more comments from council, I think you should say them now prior to your vote, just so that the record is clear, so we don't have comments mixed in with votes. Thank you.
We have a motion.
Yes, I recommend that we adopt the proposed tax rate of .5939 per $100 valuation.
Second.
Okay, a motion and seconded. Mr. Crum?
Yes.
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 Item number 16, future agenda items or requests by council members to be on the next agenda. Mr. Malinowski?
Yeah, and I don't know if it's a request or a comment, but, well, it is a request. I'd like an update on the agreement between the district and the city. When we talked about this 3-4 months ago, we have visited, I'd like to know, that agreement, some of the works were completed for sure before we issue any bonds. And the agreement is to ownership of right equipment.
Are you talking about the one on the roles and responsibilities better
Correct.
defined? Okay.
Exactly, better.
Yes, sir.
Anything else?
I think it's fine in this after the, I think sometime in September, but I think we do need in the short-term future, we need to look at any consumer assistance program because, that's gonna, is straight through and that's it, they're in the first. So we don't need to like apply.
So, look at a subcommittee, mayor subcommittee on, I didn't hear the.
Consumer utility assistance.
Oh, okay, thank you, sorry.
Anything else?
I think you're gonna already get it, Dean, but I would like to see the feasibility of the existing Devon property and, what we think we can get and if there is any potential suitors for leasing that property.
Lease only?
Or purchase.
We already own it, so you're talking about selling it?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Mainly just lease.
Item 17, adjourned.
Yeah, he called me today and said,
You're welcome. Thank y'all. No, I will. I ain't shy.
Yeah.
Hey, how are you? Mama asked me.
Oh.